Chapter 2444. Horace stood on top of a boulder in an uninhabited valley filled with strange rocks, looking anxiously to the east. 15 minutes ago, he had managed to get in touch with Fergus. Young Master Fergus agreed to help him escape capture on account of his many years of loyalty. He would be given a new identity, and he would leave Tucker City for a small town in the northwest. The Dixon family had a branch there, and he would become the new CEO of the company. After 10 years, he would be allowed to return to Tucker City. With the Dixon family's power, he knew Fergus could do this easily. It's a small town, but it's still a company of the Dixon family. There should be many young and beautiful girls there. Horace was already looking forward to his life. A speck of light appeared on the horizon, and a flying car with a dark glow appeared on the horizon. Then, in the blink of an eye, it arrived in front of them. There was no sign on the car, and it hovered 5 meters in front of Horace like a ghost. Horace's face lit up, and he quickly jumped down from the boulder. The door opened, and a young man wearing black tights and sunglasses stepped out. He looked at Horace with a murderous expression. Horace? Yes, I am Horace. Horace smiled and nodded. He wondered why Fergus didn't send someone he knew. The young man in black opened his bracelet and confirmed Horace's identity. He looked around and smiled coldly. You've picked a good place. This place is very hidden, and it's not easy to find. I found it when I was choosing the location. Horace was proud, but he still urged, let's leave as soon as possible. I heard Charlie and Bart have been caught. Where is your flying car? The young man asked. It's behind that boulder. Horace waved his hand, and a flying car flew out from behind the boulder. Good. We can go now. The young man nodded and walked back to his flying car. Should I change my bracelet now? Will we be tracked? Horace followed behind the young man and raised his hand to show his bracelet. The young man walking in front suddenly stopped. When he turned around, his hand was already on Horace's throat. Looking at Horace's face, which had turned red in the blink of an eye, he shook his head and said, No need. The young master said that if they can't find you, it will be more troublesome. Horace's eyes widened in shock and pain as he looked at the young man who was holding him up by the throat with one hand. He said in a hoarse voice, He wants to silence me. If you didn't silence them, they will soon find out that you committed suicide here because you couldn't face the punishment of life imprisonment. This is very reasonable. The young man shook his head and increased the strength of his hand, preparing to completely end him. Horace's face was filled with despair. He already knew that Fergus was going to let this matter end here. The dead couldn't speak, and they could bear all the blame. White light had already appeared in front of his eyes, and he had no strength to resist or struggle. His opponent was a level 8 expert, and he was completely suppressed. Right at this moment, a white light descended from the sky. Ding! A slender black sword pierced into the stone. The black-clothed man's hand that was holding Horace was cut off by the sword. Blood splattered all over Horace's face. The young man let out a cry of pain, but he didn't care about the pain. A short 3-edged spike appeared in his left hand, and he threw himself at Horace, who had fallen to the ground. A figure descended from the sky and kicked the black-clothed man in the waist, sending him flying and breaking dozens of stone pillars and strange rocks. The 3-edged spike didn't pierce Horace's heart, but it still left a bloody wound on his thigh. Horace clutched his throat and fell to the ground. He ignored the pain in his thigh and looked at the black-clothed deacon in surprise. He said in a hoarse voice, Save me. I'll tell you everything. I'll tell you everything. Fergus wants to silence me. I've laundered tens of billions of dollars for the Dixon family over the past few hundred years. They want to silence me. The black-clothed man was wearing a luxurious black robe and a black gold mask. He looked very noble and mysterious. His sharp eyes turned to the black-clothed young man who was pinned down by the huge rock, and he raised his hand. Bang! The black-clothed young man exploded without warning. The huge shockwave turned all the rocks within a 10-meter radius into dust. A suicide soldier. Meg frowned. This was far more vicious than a hidden weapon. Meg waved his hand to disperse the shockwave of the explosion. Horace looked at the rubble falling from the sky with lingering fear, but at the same time, he let out a sigh of relief. He didn't expect Fergus to send an assassin to kill him, let alone someone so ruthless. Thank you for saving me. Please take me away from here. As long as you can guarantee my safety, I'll tell you everything I know. Horace bowed to Meg. Judging from the power displayed by this mysterious black-clothed man, he was at least a 10th-tier combatant. He just didn't know which faction he belonged to. What Horace didn't know was that on the micro-push screen, there was a room called Trial of Horace. The creator of the room was the Judge of Judgment. The live broadcast started with the black-clothed assassin strangling Horace. Then, the black-clothed deacon descended from the sky, chopped off the assassin's arm, and sent him flying with a kick. With the entire internet searching for Horace, the sudden appearance of this live streaming room was instantly pushed to the front page after it was discovered. Fuck. The Department of Investigation Services couldn't find Horace, but the streamer found him. Trial of Horace. Is this a live broadcast of a trial? What a brutal scene. Is this the legendary suicide soldier of a tycoon? That's terrifying. Even the Dixon family is involved. Watch and cherish this. I feel like the streamer's account is going to be gone soon. Please help me cut him down. I'll send you a rocket. The netizens were shocked by the bloody scene of the suicide soldier exploding, but they were also excited by the streamer's content. Are you negotiating with me? Meg stared at Horace. You know, I want to live. These are the only secrets I have left. Horace grinned, revealing his cunning nature. Unfortunately, I'm not interested in these. Meg shook his head. He bent down and slowly pulled the black sword out of the rock. His voice was cold and solemn. Horace, today, I will judge your crimes. Over the past 300 years, you, Charlie, and Bart have sexually assaulted 362 women, including 62 underage girls. 18 of the victims committed suicide due to the humiliation. Over 100 of the victims were depressed. Do you plead guilty? End of chapter. Chapter 2445. Judging Horace's livestream quickly climbed on the micropush interface and gained a lot of attention in a short period of time. After the sexual assault case was exposed by Hades, his amazing performance in the Chef King competition increased the attention of the case even more. A highly respected director in the entertainment industry, an evergreen tree in the film industry, and a favorite in the film industry, was so immoral that he would do such a thing to hundreds of innocent girls and directly cause more than a dozen of them to commit suicide out of depression. Such a contrast was shocking and infuriating. The investigation bureau quickly intervened, and Charlie and Bart were arrested one after another. However, Horace disappeared after escaping the film base, and they had no clue where to find him. Some netizens started a Find Horace campaign, and the number of people who responded had exceeded 10 million. Unexpectedly, before the investigation bureau and the netizens could find him, a live stream of judging Horace appeared on the micropush. Moreover, the opening of the live stream was a critical hit. The black-clothed man of sacrifice wanted to kill Horace, but his arm was cut off by a sword from the sky, and he self-destructed when he had no hope of escaping. This kind of realistic scene brought a great shock to the audience. Horace's words in a panic also proved the existence of the legendary men of sacrifice of the plutocrats. Of course, what surprised the audience even more was that the person who came was not from the investigation bureau, but a mysterious masked man in black. More importantly, he was not there to arrest Horace, but to put him on trial. There was no court, and there were no victims present. There was only the suspect and the black-clothed man who called himself the judge. Professional lawyers had analyzed that in the Tucker City Supreme Court, which was increasingly cautious in sentencing sentences, the possibility of Horace being sentenced to death for his crimes was very low, and he might even be imprisoned for less than 50 years. With Horace's current age, he had a chance to walk out of prison alive. This result also caused a great deal of indignation on the internet. A bastard who caused hundreds of victims to fall into the mud could only get such a light sentence in the end. However, this judge had found Horace before the investigation bureau and started a live stream of the trial. Everyone was looking forward to what kind of trial he would give Horace. In the Micropush headquarters, Lucian, who had just fallen asleep, was hastily woken up by the operations director, Amos. "What's the matter?" Lucian, who had been interrupted by his afternoon nap, was a little unhappy. "Horace was caught," Amos said nervously. "He's just a director. Without the help of the Dixon family, do you think he has the ability to escape the pursuit of the Department of Investigation Services?" Lucian's expression became more and more unhappy. No matter how big the problem was, they still came to him. No. He wasn't caught by the Department of Investigation. He was caught by a mysterious person who calls himself the judge. Furthermore, he opened a live stream on Weibo and is broadcasting Horace's trial live. Amos tapped on his wristband and switched to dual screen mode. On one side was the live broadcast of the Nephilic judge, and on the other side was the replay of the previous live broadcast, starting from when the men of sacrifice in black was about to kill Horace. Lynching. Lucian looked at the virtual screen. His eyes widened, and his sleepiness disappeared. There were a lot of important elements in this video and it was very sensitive. The Dixon family wanted to kill Horace to silence him, and they had even sent their most loyal men of sacrifice. From the looks of it, they were already very prepared. However, the scene was coincidentally witnessed by the judge, who even recorded it live. The ancient tycoons had existed for tens of thousands of years and were once the rulers of the underground city. Later, with the reform of the system, they slowly retreated behind the scenes. However, they still controlled and influenced the underground city in certain ways. Of course, this kind of control was kept secret and was not known to the general public. The stories of the tycoons raising men of sacrifice and even private soldiers were only rumors on the internet. There was no concrete evidence. However, today's video directly hammered the Dixon family to death. Raising men of sacrifice and silencing them. Was this what a tycoon was like? Scared. To be honest, Lucian was also a little scared. He knew the power of the tycoons, but he did not expect them to be so decisive in silencing Horace. Sitting in this position, it was inevitable that he would offend some party. Would he encounter such a thing on the road one day? Should we close the live stream first? Amos asked. We can use the excuse of violating the law to prevent copycat crimes. Closing the live stream can please the Dixon family, but we might offend a few other families. Moreover, I have to confirm the military's opinion first. Lucian shook his head and tapped on his wristband to dial a number. He said, "Go back first and wait for my news." Okay. Amos left quickly. Soon, Lucian received a reply from the military. The public needs to vent their emotions. It's better to let them go. After pondering for a while, Lucian sent a message to Amos, telling him to wait and see. He would not interfere with the live stream for the time being. Bastard! Look at what you've done. A loud slap echoed in the villa. Fergus, whose face was half swollen, lowered his head in fear. He was the one who sent the men. To be safe, he specially sent a level 9 man of sacrifice. It was absolutely safe to kill Horace, who was only level 5. However, he did not expect that someone would come out of nowhere and kill the man of sacrifice that the Dixon family had carefully trained and capture Horace alive. What was more terrifying was that he actually broadcasted it all. The tycoons raising men of sacrifice was not a secret among the tycoons. The interests of such a large family involved all walks of life in the underground city. There were always some things that were inconvenient to deal with openly. At this time, the men of sacrifice were the best players to deal with these matters. However, for the ordinary people, this was an absolute secret. It was something that could not be discussed on the table. However, this so-called judge tore apart this layer of fig leaf. Horace's words made it impossible for the Dixon family to hide. Don't interfere in this matter. I will solve it. From today onwards, you are grounded for 3 months, Molin said coldly. Patriarch, the company still needs me to do many things. All your duties in the company are cancelled. We will talk about it again when you are able to do things safely. Molin interrupted Fergus and looked at him coldly. Fergus felt his back was cold. He hurriedly lowered his head, agreed, and left quickly. Damn it. I must find that guy and tear him into pieces. After leaving the villa, Fergus' eyes were full of ruthlessness. He angrily punched the air, and the space distorted a little. Quickly locate the location and deploy the nearest force. However, warn them not to act rashly. The opponent's strength is at least a level 10 warrior. Seal the scene and wait for backup. In Tucker City, the chief of the investigation bureau looked away from the big screen and ordered. Chapter 2446. Horace's matter put a large amount of pressure on the investigation department's chief Pack-Hate. The military statement made them have no choice but to intervene in this matter that had a large influence on the internet. The pressure from the Dixon family also gave him a headache. But now something that gave him an even bigger headache had happened. While the investigation department was still tracking Horace, someone had found him ahead of time and wanted to put him on trial, even broadcasting it live. Rumors of the investigation department's incompetence filled the air. This was simply slapping their faces. Damn it. Which idiot in the Dixon family is doing this? Pack-Hate silently cursed. He didn't mention this matter at first because he wanted to give the Dixon family some time to clean up their mess. Whether it was letting Horace disappear for a while or letting him disappear completely, everyone's faces would look better. But now this cover had been torn off. The Dixon family's attempt to silence him had been broadcasted live. The person that the investigation department couldn't find had been found by a mysterious person. The Dixon family should be distancing themselves from this matter, and he had a headache over how to remove the hat of incompetence that was placed on his head, otherwise his promotion next month would fail. Very quickly, the technical staff had locked onto Horace's current location. It was 3,000 kilometers away from Tucker City and it would take around 20 minutes to send people over. The nearest police station could reach the scene in about 10 minutes. Only this mountain branch's battle strength was limited, with the strongest being only at the 7th level, so they would only be delivering food if they went. The headquarters experts were all sent out and there were even 2 battleships with them. He was actually caught on the spot. This little slut Fergus will suffer. Moreover, he saved me the money of finding an assassin. On the top floor of the Twin Towers, a collie was happily watching the broadcast. But, who is this handsome guy? Although he's wearing a mask, based on his figure and his deep and sexy voice, he should be a handsome guy with an aesthetic style, right? In the younger generation, there doesn't seem to be a handsome guy with this kind of strength and a sense of justice, right? A collie looked at the masked man on the screen and swallowed a mouthful of saliva. She wasn't angry at all because the other side had shamed the Dixon family. No, I just became a fan of Hades. I can't change my mind so quickly. That's immoral. However, Horace was exposed by Hades, and now he's being judged by this masked man. Both of them are super righteous. Yeah, as expected of me. I'm a fan now. In just a few minutes, the number of people who had entered Nephilic Judge's livestream through various channels had exceeded 10 million, and it was increasing at a terrifying speed. Meanwhile, in the valley, Meg pointed his sword at Horace, who was slumped on the ground. Meg had watched many movies when he was learning the dungeon common tongue, including a few movies directed by Horace. He had to admit that Horace was indeed outstanding when it came to making movies. This was also the reason why he was able to sweep through many film festivals and gain the favor of the Dixon family. However, talent was not an excuse for committing a crime. Before the victims were violated, they probably would never have thought that this respected senior in the circle would do such a beastly thing to them. You can't judge me. My crimes can only be judged by the court. Horace panicked. He thought of an old movie called The Judge. The movie was about a time thousands of years ago when the law was not yet perfect. The rich and powerful ran amok, and the common people had no way of making a living. A mysterious masked man, who called himself the judge, judged and executed the rich and powerful who had committed heinous crimes. The movie caused a great deal of controversy at the time, and there were many cases of copycat crimes. As a result, the movie was included in the list of banned films. The man in front of him, who called himself the judge, was going to judge him here. You are really stubborn and unrepentant. Meg sneered under the mask. He looked down at Horace and said coldly, for more than 300 years, you have been hiding in the shadows of the Dixon family. You have persecuted innocent girls and blocked their voices. Your crimes are too numerous to list. I hereby sentence you to death with 362 swords. You will be executed immediately. As soon as he finished speaking, a rusty blunt sword appeared in his hand, and the sharp black sword was put away. What are you doing? You are committing a crime. Horace's voice was trembling. He supported his body and backed away. Then, he hit a huge rock hard. There was no way out. The first sword is for the girl called Lost Deer. Meg raised the sword in his hand and slashed at the root of Horace's troubles. The second sword is for the girl in red who jumped into the lake. The sword slowly pierced Horace's thigh. The third sword is for Horace's screams did not affect the speed of Meg's sword swinging. The blunt sword pierced through the flesh, and the uneven blade cut into the muscles. The pain was greatly amplified. Meg didn't enjoy this process, but at this moment, he felt that every thrust of his sword was a little heavy. This is great. My gloominess for the whole day was gone. 362 swords. Is this for each victim? How thoughtful. This is what torture should be like. If I had used a sharp sword, that old man would have had it easy. The judge has returned. Tremble, bad guys. The bullet screen was flooded, and the emotions of the netizens were stirred up. In the slums of Tucker City, in a narrow and dim room, a thin middle-aged woman looked at the blurry image on her bracelet with tears streaming down her face. She held a dark yellow teddy bear in her arms. She gently stroked the teddy bear and whispered, "Kesha, someone has avenged you. That bad guy has finally been judged." In the film city, a film crew was filming. The second female lead who was about to appear on stage suddenly broke down. After apologizing, she covered her face and ran to the bathroom. She locked the door and squatted in a corner. She looked at Horace who was being pierced by swords. She covered her mouth and laughed, but her tears ruined her makeup. Next to a garbage dump in an alley, a dazed woman sat on the side of the street, watching the live broadcast in the bakery across the street. Suddenly, a glimmer of light appeared in her dull eyes. She staggered up from the ground and walked step by step to the floor-to-ceiling window of the bakery. Then, she grinned and her eyes became clearer. Chapter 24:47. The sword in Meg's hand was steady. Every stab hit a non-fatal spot, and at the same time, he was able to inflict enough pain on Horace. In order to maintain Horace's consciousness and vitality so that he could fully experience the pain of every stab, Meg even fed him a few healing pills every time he opened his mouth to cry out in pain. It was the kind of medicine that could be bought at any pharmacy in the underground city. It was not expensive, but the effect was quite significant. "Kill me. I know I was wrong. Just kill me." Horace's voice was filled with fear and pain. He suddenly regretted not cooperating with the killer and giving himself a quick death. Fresh blood slowly flowed from the wounds. The healing pills kept him awake like never before, and he could clearly feel the intense pain of every wound. As his deep and emotionless voice recited one stab after another, some images appeared in his mind. They were the women he violated. He used to enjoy their resistance, and their futile struggle only made him more excited. At this moment, a sharp sword appeared in their hands as they stabbed at him with a ferocious expression. They were here for revenge. They gathered their humiliation into this sword and stabbed it into his body. The 208th stab, for the girl who loved the blue sea but could not be buried by the sea. Meg's voice was still emotionless. The blunt sword in his hand pierced into Horace's elbow, severing the tendons and bones and removing the joint. However, his eyes swept across the cliff in the distance. 3 figures appeared on the cliff. The silver emblem on the arrowhead reflected a faint light. It was the people from the investigation bureau. 10 minutes. Not bad. However, the leader was only a level 7. Although the sniper had locked onto him, he did not shoot. The nearby branch should have arrived earlier, right? Meg had a brief conversation with she earlier. It would take 20 minutes for the investigation bureau from Tucker City to arrive. In order to avoid a direct confrontation with the investigation bureau, he needed to leave this place before their main force arrived. Meg gave 30% of his attention to the members of the investigation bureau who appeared on the opposite cliff and sped up the execution. The other party probably did not have an anti-material rifle of she's level, but it was better to be safe than sorry. It would be embarrassing if they failed miserably. "Captain, what should we do now?" On the cliff, 3 scouts were hiding between a boulder and a shrub. One of them was driving a black heavy sniper rifle and had already locked onto the black figure in the valley below. They were now 5 kilometers away from the valley, completely within the effective killing range of the sniper rifle. "He has already discovered us." The sniper released his finger from the trigger and sounded a little depressed. He believed that he had been careful enough to conceal himself, but the moment he took aim, the other party still discovered them. This sniper rifle could allow him to kill enemies beyond his level from 5,000 meters away. If the enemy was unaware, he could even kill a level 10 powerhouse with one shot. But when he saw the man's pitch-black eyes under the mask through the scope, even his soul trembled a little. That feeling had already surpassed the pressure brought to him by a 10th-tier powerhouse. He chose to give up on trying to snipe a super expert who might surpass level 10. "The orders from above are for us to stay on guard and keep an eye on them. Don't let them leave so easily and wait for the main force to arrive," the captain said in a deep voice. "That bastard deserves to die. How many girls have he harmed?" The squad member on the side muttered. "You can say this in private, but don't say it when the people from the headquarters arrive." "Be careful not to lose your hat," Quark said with a smile. Looking at the scene of the execution that was going on below the valley, his gaze was also somewhat complicated. Back then, he had chosen to leave the Tucker City headquarters and come to this remote forest branch because he could not stand the bureaucratic style. The laws written on the surface were the same, but there was a difference in the actual punishment that fell on people. For a guy like Horace, there were a bunch of case records and evidence in the headquarters, but for more than 300 years, he was still active in various major film festivals and was still earning more than $1 billion to film big-budget movies. Even though the military had been getting stronger over the years, it was still beyond their reach when it came to these matters. He had also paid attention to Horace's case this morning, but according to the usual practice, Horace would either be hidden or silenced by the Dixon family, or he would be sent to prison for a relatively short term by influencing the verdict. After the limelight died down, he would be released on medical parole for various reasons. The Criminal Investigation Bureau did not even have the right to beat the dogs reared by the plutocrats, let alone seek justice for the victims. He did not expect such a ruthless person to appear halfway through the Dixon family's attempt to silence him. It was a live broadcast on the internet, a live trial, and an execution on the spot. Although he knew that this was against the law, his heart was slightly shaken at the moment. If it were not for this so-called judge, when would the injustice of those innocent girls be upheld? How long would those wretched men who were still reaching their dirty hands to those helpless girls continue to be arrogant? This guy had removed the cloth that covered everyone's shame. At this moment, those guys should be feeling fear, right? The Investigation Bureau has sent out 2 battleships and 8 level 10 powerhouses. They will enter the battle range in 8 minutes. You must evacuate in 5 minutes. She's voice came from Meg's earpiece and 2 red dots that were rapidly approaching appeared in his line of sight. The time is just right. Meg pulled the sword out of Horace's bloodied body and stabbed him in a relatively clean spot. 362 stabs. This was Meg's revenge for those recorded victims, but there were probably many victims who kept this matter to themselves for various reasons. Kill me, please kill me. I'll tell you everything I know. Fergus from the Dixon family was also involved. He killed a girl with his own hands and buried her under a big tree outside the film city. I also know a lot of things about the circle. As long as you promise to kill me next time, I'll tell you everything. Horace was on the verge of breaking down. He only wanted to die. Meg's sword paused for a moment. He looked at Horace and asked, "You said that Fergus killed a girl and buried her under the tree outside the studio? Is this true?" "It's true. He took a liking to that girl, and asked me to bring her to his room. The girl resisted, and he killed her. We took care of her body together, so it's true." Horace nodded hurriedly, and looked at Mag with bloodshot eyes. "You can kill me now, right? As an accomplice, I'll add one more stab." Meg's voice was cold as he stabbed with the blunt sword. Chapter 2448. Isn't Fergus the president of the cast group? He was named one of the top 10 Mr. of the Year by a fashion magazine. He's also a direct descendant of the Dixon family. I heard that he's a strong contender for the next family head. Scum. Is this what a tyrant looks like? Fuck. I feel like my worldview has been completely shattered today. What's wrong with this world? Is this the real world? Lock the doors and windows. I'm a little scared now. The bullet screen decreased significantly, but the anger was gradually accumulating. No one would have thought that the high and mighty tycoons would be so filthy and terrifying. At that moment, the live stream was suddenly cut off. The live stream had been banned by Weibo. Hundreds of millions of viewers watching the live stream were suddenly homeless. Crazy. Almost at the same time, the sound of bracelets being smashed could be heard all over the dungeon. The homeless viewers in the live stream swarmed into the front row of the trending searches and began to vent their anger at Weibo. Dog Weibo, did you ban the live stream because it threatened your master's interests? Tycoon in front of others, murderer in private. Unban Weibo from today onwards. Meg noticed that the live stream had been banned. He wasn't too surprised. In fact, he was surprised that the live stream had lasted for so long. After all, Horace's previous comments were equivalent to dragging the Dixon family down. However, the banning of the live stream didn't affect the pace of his execution. He changed his mind and decided to spare Horace's life for the time being. Therefore, he began to dig up dirt on the Dixon family from Horace, including how they used him to launder money, the murder case that Fergus was involved in, and other criminal scandals. The live stream was forced to stop, but the recording of the video continued. 363 swords, not one more, not one less. However, Meg spared Horace's life. Other than his life, his hands, legs, and the source of his crimes were far away from him. When the 5-minute countdown ended, Meg fed Horace enough healing pills to last until the Department of Investigation arrived. Then, he turned into a shadow and disappeared from the valley. On the opposite cliff, the 3 investigators blinked their eyes and were stunned when they saw the man in black disappear into the valley. Why did he suddenly disappear? The team member jumped up and scanned the canyon with his binoculars. The life sign detector showed that there was only a weak life sign left in the canyon. He's gone. It's exactly 363 swords, but that bastard isn't dead yet. Let's hurry over. Quark leaped up and jumped onto the flying car beside him, rushing down the valley. He didn't know why the director had suddenly changed his mind and didn't kill Horace directly, but he knew that the director was going to have a headache. This was much more troublesome than receiving a corpse. After entering the half-step transcendent realm, Meg's speed had greatly increased, and coupled with his recent mastery of riding sword flight, his burst of speed was comparable to Shishi's starship. Therefore, 3 minutes later, Meg had already appeared in a dense forest 300 miles away. Meg put away his sword and prepared to take out his flying car. A black warship suddenly appeared in the sky above the forest. Meg gripped his sword. Come up. The hatch below the warship opened and Shi's voice rang in his ears. Why are you here? Meg was a little surprised, but he still jumped into the warship. The hatch closed and the warship started up silently. It activated stealth mode and quietly disappeared into the horizon. Meg stepped into the cockpit and looked at Shi, who was sitting in the main pilot's seat. He smiled and said, "A new warship. The operation this time is highly confidential, so it's inconvenient to use my warship." She turned on autopilot and got up from the main pilot's seat. She looked at Meg with a complicated gaze. "I know I'm handsome, but you don't have to stare at me like that. After all, I already have a wife and a child." Meg took off his mask and smiled. "The waters of a corporation run deep. You won't be able to grasp it," she said in a low voice. "I've always been straightforward. As for how deep the waters run, I don't need to think about it. I'm only responsible for muddying the waters." Meg tapped on his bracelet and asked, "How do I publish the video on the internet?" "It's not benevolent to push it, but it shouldn't be stuck on every platform, right? Did you kill him?" "No, I left him alive. He definitely won't live anyway, but it'll be interesting to see who kills him." Meg's smile had a hint of slyness. She fell silent. She quickly understood Meg's meaning and said, "I'll have to ask my superiors about this." "Then you'll have to hurry, or he'll die." 3 minutes later, she helped Meg publish the entire trial video on the internet. As expected, the video was banned from the internet within 3 minutes. "You underestimated the influence of a corporation," she said to Meg as she looked at the grayed-out video. You underestimated the public's ability to spread resources. Meg left the cockpit with a smile and went to the lounge. The closure of the trial live stream ignited the public's anger. However, 10 minutes later, the full version of Horace's trial was released on the internet and appeared on all the mainstream video websites. All the major platforms and websites reacted quickly and took the video down. However, the blocking of public channels couldn't stop the spread of the video. Netizens used their various methods to make the video spread at a viral speed. Even scalpers were eyeing the business of selling videos. Meg knew from the beginning that the video was the only thing that could be widely spread. After all, only a small number of people were able to witness it in the live stream. The latter half of the video sent chills down the audience's spine and chills down their spines. The corporation was above ordinary people and did whatever they wanted. Their actions were the law and they were thoroughly analyzed. At the end of the video, the judge did not kill Horace. Instead, he cut off his arms and legs and spared his life. Since the witness was still there, it was up to the investigation department to handle the rest. The Fergus rape and murder case, the Dixon family's money laundering case, and some dirty business in the circle were all cases that the investigation department had to investigate. System, have you learned enough? Meg asked loudly as he closed the door of the lounge and lay on his bed. The words "system learning" flashed across his mind. The system was silent as the words continued to float across. Useless. I let you connect to the internet, but you still haven't learned. Meg pursed his lips and was about to quit. In order to understand this world better, the first thing Meg did after entering the underground city was to connect the system to the underground city's internet and plunder the technology of the underground city. The system's technology level was lower than the underground city's because it was compatible with the Norland continent. However, the system had unlimited potential. After all, it was created by the heavenly Tao. Using the system's explanation, it meant that the 1000T network disk was only filled with 1 G of stuff. It could definitely store more stuff and increase its capacity. The underground city's filming methods are really impressive. The system's voice suddenly sounded. End of chapter. Chapter 2449. Is the piece you're looking at serious? Meg frowned and could not help but ask. That's definitely serious. The system said with certainty. Have you learned it? It's really not easy to learn. Let's be serious. I asked you to help me find the source and information of the Divine Monument. Do you have any leads? Meg's expression became more serious as he asked in his heart. In this trip to the underground city, Meg's main goal was the Divine Monument that recorded the secret to becoming a god. Although he had a certain degree of empathy for the oppressed people in the underground city, he was not so saintly as to immediately put himself in the role of the underground city's savior. With the system's help, it's naturally easy. The system has flipped through a lot of top-secret information and can say with absolute certainty that the stone monument did indeed fall from the sky. The timeline is the same as the information you've read before. So, Ferdinand is quite sincere. Meg nodded slightly and asked again, where is the Divine Monument now? How are the guards? The Divine Monument is located in the center of Tucker City. Its aura and appearance are covered by a formation. Under the Divine Monument, there is an extraordinaire guarding it all year round. There are also 4 half-step extraordinaires who take turns guarding it. It is the most heavily guarded place in the entire underground city. Of course, this does not include the many high-level warships that are always on standby. Meg frowned. His plan to sneak a look at the Divine Monument had been extinguished. 1 extraordinaire and 4 half-step extraordinaires guarding it. It could be seen that the underground city valued this Divine Monument. However, this was not difficult to understand. The divine monument hid the secret to becoming a god and directly opened up the technology tree for the underground city. It would be strange if it was not valued. Since you can't observe it personally, have you found any pictures or videos of the divine monument? Meg asked again. He had tried to search for pictures of the divine monument on the internet but did not find any relevant content. The divine monolith cannot be recorded by anything, so there are no pictures or videos. Moreover, according to the people who have comprehended the divine monolith, everyone sees a different divine monolith, and the things they comprehend are also different from person to person. The system replied. It is indeed very mystical. Looks like I still have to complete Ferdinand's mission properly, Meg thought to himself. What the system said was quite similar to a rumor he had heard before. Sitting on the returning warship, Pashade's eyelids twitched as he watched the video his subordinate had just sent him. By the time they arrived at the scene of the live broadcast, the mysterious Inquisitor had already disappeared. All that was left was Horace, who had been sliced into pieces. Even though he had worked in the investigation agency for 500 years, Pahat had rarely seen such a tragic corpse. Oh, no, Horace is still alive. The assassin stabbed Horace 363 times, but he didn't kill him. Instead, he gave Horace a handful of healing pills before he left, which kept him alive until they arrived at the scene. Although Horace's injuries were terrifying, none of them were fatal. His life was no longer in danger with the help of the healers. It seemed that they had arrived just in time. However, Pahat wanted to slap himself in the face. Horace was still alive. That meant he had a lot of things to worry about. Should he investigate the Fergus murder case? The witnesses were still there, but the physical evidence had already been investigated by the local branch. Should he investigate the Dixon family's money laundering case? The accusation that Horace had made at the last minute was very clear, even down to how much money had been laundered by which movie. If Horace was dead, there would be a lot of leeway for them to maneuver around the situation. However, not only was Horace still alive, but the mysterious person had also posted the whole process of the trial on the internet. The whole world knew that Horace was still alive. If he was dead, then he would be dead for sure. Watch Horace carefully. You must bring him back alive. Pahat turned off the video and instructed his subordinates. Although this matter was a headache, it was the Dixon family's fault. He didn't have to be so stubborn as to take the blame. He just had to do his job well. Hua, this time it's interesting. Damn slut, see if I don't kill you this time. Akali was lying on the sofa as she sent a few messages on her wristband. She looked up at the secretary standing on the side and ordered, "Release all the black material we have. I want that slut to never be able to rise again." Young miss, if we release it now and the family head finds out, wouldn't it? The secretary said in a hesitant voice. Idiot, don't you know how to not let the family head know? Akali rolled her eyes. She sat up and her expression became much colder. This fellow is a sex fiend, even you were almost violated by him. If we let him go now, who knows how many girls will suffer in the future. The secretary seemed to have thought of something and his eyes filled with a bit of anger. He said with a nod, I'll go now. After taking care of Fergus, there are only 2 left. Little brother Hades really is my lucky star. Akali's lips slightly curled. She opened the chat and saw that her message to Hades was still unread. She slightly knit her brows. This is the first man that doesn't even read my message. Meg ended his conversation with the system and the system was in a hurry to learn, so he also opened the chat. On the hot search list, Roasted Lamb Chop Tutorial, Hades Promotion, and Chef King Tournament Top 4 were still in the front row. As for the trial of Horace and Fergus, there was nothing at all. The power of capital was displayed at this moment. Of course, the emotions of the people couldn't be stopped. Although the chat removed the hot searches, lowered the popularity, and blocked the keywords, when one opened the hot search list, the comments below were all discussing this matter. Of course, the most mentioned sentence was, "Justice may be late, but it will never be absent." Meanwhile, Meg's tweet in the morning had already exceeded 100 million likes, and the number of comments had also exceeded 10 million. But looking at the data, Meg thought that he had hired a water army and it was the kind that didn't have a brain. Meg thought for a bit and didn't release a new tweet. This wave of popularity, he didn't want to take advantage of it. Then he opened the private chat that was covered in red. There were probably several million people who had sent him messages and they were all praising him. There were even more people who were scolding him in private messages from his previous life. 2 levels of reversal. Meg stroked his chin. Being praised like this, he wasn't used to it. Then he found a pinned message. The golden glowing account was very dazzling and unusual, giving off the aura of a rich woman. Meg opened the message. "Little brother Hades, let's eat together tonight. I'll wait for you on the top floor of the Twin Towers." Meg thought for a bit before replying, "I'm sorry, I'm not free. If you like Daddy's Restaurant in the Other World, please bookmark it. Daddy's Restaurant in the Other World is updated the fastest in the new Book C Pavilion." Chapter 2450. Is it alright if you don't have time? Akali looked at the reply she just received and her eyes opened wide. She had always been the one to reject others, but she never thought that she would be rejected today. "It's just a simple meal and meeting. In order to wait for your reply, I waited an entire day." Akali sent another message. "Based on the record, it's 1 hour and 8 minutes. Akali gritted her teeth in anger. There was actually this kind of straight man in this world. It was his fault for not replying, but he was still being picky. "Humph, if it wasn't for your good looks, I wouldn't have spoiled you." Akali turned off the bracelet and took a few deep breaths before sending another message. "Bow, then rest well. You've worked hard in the competition, moi." Turning off the bracelet, Akali buried her face in the sofa. Ah. What did I send? So disgusting." Meg looked like an old man looking at his phone with a question mark on his face. Is this how rich women chat these days? So oily. Turning off the bracelet, Meg didn't continue replying. His main goal now was to enter the McCarthy family through Nancy. At this time, he naturally couldn't flirt with the rich women of the Dixon family. They were all rich women, so he had to make a choice. It was a pity that the landmark Twin Tower building was destroyed. Has it really spread out completely? She looked at the comments on Weibo and the statistics that she had just received. The video that was banned from the internet swept the internet at a terrifying speed and almost became a household name. How did he know that this video would spread? She couldn't help looking in the direction of the lounge. She never thought that as an underground person, she would be taught a harsh lesson by Meg. Meg's actions were not within the plan and even violated the laws of the underground city to a large extent. But in her heart, she was a bit envious of Meg's straightforward actions. When she received the information in the morning, she was furious. However, she knew that under the influence of the tycoons, the information in their hands was only the tip of the iceberg. Meg, an outsider, directly tore apart the relationships between people of different social classes in a rude and unreasonable way, and directly pushed the deepest contradictions to the forefront. The anger of the masses had been ignited. This time, the Dixon family had to give an explanation to appease the anger of the masses. The tycoons were obviously not happy to see this happen, but she knew that there was one person who would be happy to see it happen. That was why she appeared outside the canyon to pick up Meg. This solidified world seemed to show signs of loosening because of Meg's arrival. She was even looking forward to what kind of storm this legendary existence who once stirred up the Norland continent would stir up in the buried city. Ding! She's bracelet beeped. She glanced at it with a slightly strange expression before sending a message to Meg. Nancy wants to see me. Are all the fair-skinned, rich, and pretty girls in the underground city so impatient? Meg muttered as he walked out of the lounge. He looked at she and said, "Do you have any more detailed information about Nancy's preferences?" Meg sneaked back to the contestants' dormitory in the Mocha building, which was no challenge for him. Then, he changed into casual clothes. Under the guidance of the staff, he went to the restaurant on the top floor of the Mocha building to have lunch with Nancy. Nancy invited him to lunch through she. I didn't expect to have to face the unspoken rules when I just entered the entertainment industry. Meg could not help but grumble, but he did not resist in his heart. He participated in the Chef King competition to sneak into the McCarthy family. If he could enter through Nancy, the result would be the same. The restaurant on the top floor was extremely luxurious. The staff led Meg to a private room and stood at the door. He opened the door and smiled at Meg. "Mr. Hades, please come in." "Thank you." Meg nodded slightly and entered the private room. The door slowly closed behind him. The decoration in the private room was simple but luxurious. It was decorated with crystals and gems. In front of the floor-to-ceiling window, a young girl was sitting by the window. She was quiet and beautiful. "Miss Nancy." Meg stopped in his tracks and greeted Nancy. "Mr. Hades, please take a seat." Nancy raised her hand and gestured with a quiet smile on her face. Meg sat down opposite Nancy and looked at her. He went straight to the point. "Miss Nancy, why did you call me here?" According to the information provided by she, Nancy preferred to deal with straightforward people. "I invited Mr. Meg here to celebrate your advancement to the top 4. I'm also curious about you and want to know you personally." Nancy was also straightforward, but she still added, "I'm the person in charge of the Chef King competition. It's my job to know every top 4 contestant. Don't quibble." Meg smiled and said, "Thank you. You can ask me anything you want to know. You don't have to be so formal. I just want to know more about you." She's hand gently slid across the table and the menu appeared on the table. "You probably haven't had lunch yet. Order first." The food on the top floor had to be better than the contestants' meals, so Mag naturally wouldn't stand on ceremony. He picked the signature dishes and ordered 2 servings. He had gone out to work, and indeed hadn't had his lunch yet. After ordering, Nancy looked at Meg and said with a smile while waiting for the dishes to be served, "You're the first contestant in the history of the Chef King competition to go viral on the first day of the competition. I didn't expect an accidental tweet to turn out like this." Meg's smile was a little helpless. "I admire your sense of justice." Nancy looked at Meg and did not hide her admiration. "It's rare to see this kind of quality nowadays. I think there's still a seed of justice in everyone's heart. It's just that the way to express it is different." Meg said frankly, "I'm no different. Humility is also a very good quality." "You're right." Meg smiled but did not say anything. He actually felt his old face was a little red. Horace didn't die, but the things he revealed in the end made the Dixon family look bad. "They may take revenge on you, just like the assassination this morning." Nancy suddenly stopped smiling and said with a serious expression, "Death is inevitable. Perhaps it's heavier than Mount Tai, or fire is lighter than a goose feather. If I had a choice, I hope it's the former," Meg said calmly. Nancy looked at Meg's bright eyes. They were as clean and clear as a clear spring at the top of a snowy mountain. She could not help but be a little dazed and moved. "What a great phrase!" Nancy praised in her heart. She only felt that the man in front of her had a higher image in her heart. There were probably very few people in the world who could be as calm and collected as he was in front of a corporation. Mr. Hades, on behalf of the McCarthy family, I invite you to be the special chef of McCarthy Manor. The McCarthy family will protect your safety. Nancy got up and solemnly extended her hand to Meg. End of chapter. Chapter 24:51. Meg looked at that white and slender hand. That tender white skin was glowing and his mood became a bit strange. He never thought that in just the first round of the competition, the goal of entering the McCarthy family was already completed. It was so fast that he felt like it wasn't real. Nancy looked at Meg's serious expression. As expected, he wasn't someone who accepted charity from others. Just as she was about to retract her hand and explain herself, a large, warm hand held hers. Young Miss Nancy, I'm very grateful for your help. I'm willing to become the special chef of the McCarthy Manor, it is my honor. Meg stood up to take Nancy's hand and said with a faint smile. The chance to live off a woman was fleeting, so of course he had to grasp it. In order to complete his mission, Meg didn't mind doing this. Hades was living off a woman, what did that have to do with Meg Shin? Meg's smile was warm and clean. Nancy was a bit dazed, but when she came back to her senses, she felt that the hand being held was a bit warm. Her face turned red and she quickly took her hand back. Hades had accepted her proposal, which was very normal. It was very hard for the chefs of the dungeon to reject this invitation. According to convention, she would choose the champion of the Chef King competition to join the McCarthy Manor as a special chef. The McCarthy family would provide him with a rich salary and a strong shelter. Meg had only participated in a single competition and she had already extended an olive branch to him. The main reason was because of the delicious roasted lamb chop, and another reason was that a collie had just called her and asked for Hades. If a collie wanted someone, she, Nancy, definitely wouldn't give him to her. So when there was a storm in the city, she extended an olive branch to Hades, which was no different from sending charcoal in the snow. Being able to hire an outstanding chef like Mr. Hades is also our honor. Nancy sat down again and took a sip of the lemon water beside her, calming her chaotic heartbeat. Young Miss Nancy, do I still need to participate in the next competition? Meg also sat down again and asked Nancy this question. Yes, you will continue to participate in the next competition. I hope that you will do your best to display your culinary skills. Nancy nodded slightly and looked at Meg expectantly. I think the audience, like me, wants to know what other surprises you will bring us. I'll do my best. Meg smiled and nodded. That was right. He was now a real traffic whirlpool. Only by continuing to participate in the competition could he maintain the popularity of the Chef King tournament. After all, it was still a business. After that, Mag and Nancy chatted for a while. As Mag had read the history of the underground city and watched tens of thousands of movies of various genres, he could easily make Nancy giggle by asking her questions based on her preferences. An hour later, the pleasant meal time was over. Meg took the initiative to leave. Mr. Hades is really an interesting person. Nancy watched the door of the private room slowly close with a smile on her face. She had never chatted so happily with a man. His knowledge was as vast as the ocean, his views were so profound, and his stand on certain matters was so consistent with hers. Originally, she only thought that she had recruited a chef with a strong sense of justice. But now, she felt that she had found a good friend. Hades gave her a completely different feeling compared to those rich second generations who only knew how to get drunk in bars and race cars late at night. Sure enough, I'm a professional at flirting. Meg looked at the system's feedback of Nancy's favorability towards him. It had increased from 62 when he entered to 82 when he left. 62 was the level of a passerby who had a slightly favorable impression of him. With Nancy's identity, this favorability was normal. 82 was different. It was the level of a good friend who had a good chat. Meg's intention to increase his favorability with Nancy was not to flirt with her. It was to prepare for the future when he entered the McCarthy family. He was not clear about the difficulty of the subsequent missions, so it was good to prepare in advance. It was not easy to come to the underground city, so naturally, he could not just stay in the contestants' dorm. Meg got a pass from she and drove the flying car out of the Mocha building for a ride. This mission is so simple. Are you sure you want me to visit the God Monument directly? Sitting in the driver's seat, Meg looked sideways at she who was sitting in the passenger seat and asked with a smile. Do you think you can become a god after visiting the God Monument? She asked. Huh? Meg was stunned. It seemed that he did think so. Visiting the God Monument, comprehending the laws and supernatural powers, and breaking through to godhood was very reasonable. More than 10,000 people are qualified to visit the God Monument every year. The core members of the rich families have a chance to visit the God Monument every year from the age of 10. Those who excel in military competitions and those who obtain military merits have a chance to visit the God Monument. All the powerhouses in the underground city who have broken through level 10 have a chance to visit the God Monument, she said calmly. Meg? How many times have you visited the God Monument? Meg asked with a heavy heart. 3 times, she said calmly. Meg, so, this is a reward that can be found anywhere. Meg felt that he was cheated. Visiting the God Monument varies from person to person. Some people only need to visit it once to get a great opportunity and become extraordinary. Some people can go thousands of times and still not get anything. You can think of it as a dispensable reward, but you can also think of it as an extremely precious chance to become a god. Meg nodded slightly, agreeing with She's statement. In this way, the God Monument was more like a blind box. No one knew what they could get out of it before they opened it themselves. However, becoming a god was a low-probability event. Even in the underground city with the God Monument, there had not been a new extraordinaire for 500 years. Where do you want to go? She asked. The Twin Towers. Meg entered a destination into the autopilot. You want to see a collie? She had a strange expression. But you just hooked up with Nancy. No, I just want to see what I just rejected. Meg shook his head and then corrected her seriously. What I did with Miss Nancy was not called hooking up. It was a very serious and friendly exchange. The light beam created a passage in the air and the flying car whistled through it without any obstruction. Tucker City was a huge city that accommodated 1.5 billion people. Tall buildings that were 1,000 meters tall could be seen everywhere and there were rows upon rows of castles in the sky. There was also a world that extended 1,000 meters underground that could not be seen. This was a 3-dimensional city with different people living in different areas. In the center of the city was a high-tech office building. The most dazzling of them were the 2 twin towers that were built side by side like 2 giant golden towers. End of chapter. Chapter 2452. It said that if you sell these 2 buildings, you can buy an entire Chaos City. Meg stopped the flying car by the side of the road and looked at the buildings that shone with golden light under the sun. The currencies of the 2 worlds can't be circulated. She raised her doubts seriously. I'm just lamenting a little. Meg's eyes fell on the top floor of one of the buildings. It was said that the woman who owned the most expensive house in the underground city lived on the top of the pyramid. From the intelligence, a collie is a fanatical groupie. She has more than 3 digits of fans, and none of them lasted for more than 3 days. She interrupted Meg's imagination. That's really the king of the sea kings. Meg was shocked. She brought Meg around Tucker City, and Meg gained a lot of knowledge. After passing through a commercial street, Meg was holding an exquisite cake in his hand. He said as he ate, "I think if I open a restaurant here, I can become a tycoon in less than a year." She nodded slightly. She did not think that Meg was boasting. "Do you think the underground city and the Norland continent will go to war one day?" Meg suddenly turned to look at her and asked. She thought seriously for a while and nodded. "It's entirely possible. In the Army's regular exercises, there's a targeted exercise in this regard." "You're really frank." Meg criticized in his heart, but his heart was heavy. This is a reserve project, not proposed by the Marshal. Besides, even you can't guarantee that the Norland continent won't covet the underground city, she said. "Yes, people are greedy." Meg nodded. He could not help but be tempted when he heard about the existence of the Divine Monument. On the way back, Meg turned on microblogging for a while. Horace's incident had evolved into various anti-harmony codenames, and it was still a hot topic on microblogging. Microblogging's disgusting approach to this incident had also angered the majority of netizens. Hence, on the official Dungeon petition website, there were more than 10 million signatures for petitions such as "Remove the Micropush" and "Punish the Micropush for Irregularities." According to the process, these two petitions had already entered the stage of official investigation. It was probably going to be a headache for the Micropush department. Apart from that, there was also the class representative's summary of the charcoal roasted lamb chop he made during the competition. It was made into a coherent instructional video, and the number of views had already exceeded 30 million. Trying to make a charcoal grilled lamb chop at home had even become a new trend. With the participation of several influential food bloggers and celebrities, this event had also attracted many people to participate. Because of this, the sales of the ovens in the dungeon skyrocketed. In the technologically advanced dungeon, it wasn't easy to find an oven that could burn charcoal. It was even harder to find a suitable charcoal. Meg clicked on a few videos of people crashing. Looking at the indescribable grilled lamb chops and the awkward but polite smiles on the faces of the people who shared the food, a smile appeared on his face. Many of these people had never cooked before. Failure was a good start. At least they had tried it themselves. After returning to the contestants' dormitory, Meg was about to ask the system for detailed information on Counselor Tam when he discovered that his believers had increased to 1210354, and it was still increasing at a rapid speed. Ding! Congratulations to the host for achieving 1 million believers. The system's voice sounded, and it set off fireworks in Meg's mind. Can you not be so tacky? Meg rolled his eyes. He couldn't stand the flashy fireworks in his mind. Isn't this a traditional celebration on Earth? The system was innocent. Where's the reward? Where's the special reward that you mentioned previously? Meg couldn't be bothered to talk nonsense with the system. Ding! Congratulations to the host for obtaining the reward, mind-controlling art. Please check. Meg looked at the golden scroll that appeared in his mind and frowned. Why did the style suddenly change to Xianxia? What's the mind-controlling art? Is it a heaven rank or earth rank technique? Please don't ridicule the host. This mind-controlling art is a spiritual energy control cultivation technique. It's not immortal cultivation and has no rank. To a certain extent, you can understand it as a type of magic. The system explained. Magic? I'm a warrior. Meg muttered in his heart, but he consciously opened the golden scroll. A sea of information suddenly appeared and filled his mind. He was very familiar with this feeling, so he quickly adapted to it and began to study this technique that was highly valued by the system. The so-called mind-controlling art, as the name suggested, was a type of spiritual energy control technique. Although the system used magic to explain it, it was actually a method to control one's spiritual energy to affect the outside world. It was fundamentally different from using magic to manipulate various elements. Of course, he wasn't too sure what a spiritual magician was like. After the number of believers broke through 1 million, Meg could feel that his spiritual energy had become more condensed and abundant. It far exceeded the spiritual energy that he should have at his level. And this mind-controlling art gave him a way to control this spiritual energy. Object control was the entry technique of the mind-controlling art. It was also a very practical technique. Meg's gaze turned to the teacup on the side table. Bang! The teacup cracked. Meg sat up and steadied his breathing. He followed the mind-controlling art's instructions and used his spiritual energy to look at the other teacup. The teacup wobbled and flew up from the coffee table. Then, it uncontrollably crashed into the wall at the side and shattered into pieces. What the hell, it's so difficult to use. Meg looked at the cleaning robot that had come out from under the bed and was automatically cleaning the broken pieces on the floor. He took a piece of paper from the side and casually folded it into the shape of a sword. Then, he stared at the sword and began to practice sword flight. Meg had tried to control his spiritual energy before and used it to his advantage. Sword flight was one of his good tricks. However, those were all tricks. Spiritual energy could only be used as a catalyst. The main thing was to rely on brute force to fly the sword. The soul-ruling art provided a plan to use mental strength as a form of energy. Although mental strength was ethereal, when one mastered the method of using it, one would discover that when this ethereal energy gathered together, it was actually a power that could not be underestimated. The paper sword flew in a crooked manner in the room. Sometimes it crashed into the wall, sometimes it crashed. But soon, it had some sense of direction and trajectory. The next morning, Meg, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed, opened his eyes. A paper sword hovered between his eyebrows, revealing its sharpness. End of chapter. Chapter 2453. With a thought, Meg sent the paper-flying sword out of the 3mm gap in the window and into the sky. When he went out for breakfast, Meg saw a short message. A base station on the top floor of the Twin Towers was destroyed for no reason this morning. The Investigation Bureau had sealed off the scene, and it was said that it was done by some kind of sharp weapon. Meg turned off the bracelet, very satisfied with the result. What made Meg a little uncomfortable was that the staff in the restaurant seemed to be paying a lot of attention to him, and this kind of attention had completely exceeded the kind of attention that a semi-finalist should have. There were even a few girls who looked at him with shining eyes. "Can we share a table?" A gentle voice interrupted Meg's thoughts. Meg looked up and saw that it was Angelina with a tray. He looked around the restaurant. The contestants' restaurant was separate from the Mocha Group's staff. As the competition entered the semi-finals, only the 4 of them were using this restaurant. Now, in addition to Amon and Potas, who were eating alone by the window, there were dozens of other tables in the restaurant. "I'm not used to eating alone." Angelina seemed to have seen through Meg's doubts and showed a gentle smile. "Not used to eating alone. What about sleeping?" Meg nodded slightly and said, "Do as you wish." "I'm Angelina." Angelina put down the tray and sat down opposite Meg. She smiled and said, "It's nice to meet you." Meg just nodded indifferently, then continued to eat his breakfast. He had a limited impression of Angelina. She was introduced in the contestants' information before. She was described as a cold goddess in the show. There were a lot of cold sycophants, so this was understandable. However, he was now a boy toy supported by a rich woman, so he couldn't casually flirt outside, especially in public. He still had the awareness that he was living off a woman. Moreover, he did not know what he was supposed to do in the later stages of the mission. Anyway, he could leave at any time. Interacting with others might lead them into the abyss. Meg's cold response didn't dampen Angelina's enthusiasm in the slightest. She didn't seem to be in a hurry to eat. She leaned forward slightly and stared at Meg with the same glint in her eyes as the two waitresses just now. She lowered her voice and said with some excitement, "Did you see the video yesterday? Justice has really arrived." Meg stopped what he was doing and looked at the excited and worshipful Angelina. He thought to himself, how is this aloof? Even the auntie who just gave me an extra drumstick is more reserved than her. I don't know what you're talking about. Meg's reply was still cold. At the same time, he was about to pick up the tray and leave. This breakfast was really disgusting. Angelina didn't seem to realize that Meg was deliberately alienating her. She said with some realization, "It seems that you haven't seen the video yesterday, right? Horace, the beast that you hung on your microblog, was judged by a person who called himself the judge yesterday. He was stabbed 363 times, once for each victim. It was you who made this matter attract everyone's attention. You have a huge contribution to this delayed justice. You are really a person with a strong sense of justice." Meg looked at the young girl who was so excited with light in her eyes. Did she meet an offline fan? But when did he become an idol? Favorability from Angelina, 92. Meg merely took a look at Angelina's favorability meter out of curiosity, and got a shock. This was far more favorable than the average couple. Generally, the peak of favorable impression between couples was when they were in the honeymoon period. At that time, even the other party's farting was considered a cute behavior. However, it was difficult for the favorable impression to exceed 95. As the heat of the honeymoon period passed and their lives returned to normal, some of their flaws would be exposed. When they realized that there was a gap between the other party and the perfect partner they had imagined, their favorability towards each other would decrease accordingly. After marriage, even breathing would be a mistake. Yesterday, they just competed on the same stage. They were pure passers-by who didn't even have any interaction with each other. Her sudden increase in favorability caught him a little off guard. "I just did what I should." Meg got up with the tray. "I'm done eating. Enjoy." This favorability rating made Meg a little scared. Was this the legendary fanatic groupie? When he was returning the plates, Meg deliberately glanced at the two big sisters who had been secretly watching him. Their favorability was 84 and 86 respectively, which was far less scary than Angelina's. Strange. Meg left the restaurant with some doubts. It seemed that she was indeed a little too fanatical. He had to be careful. Angelina looked at Meg's back, blushing. She gently bit her lower lip. Mr. Hades is indeed a gentle and polite person. His extraordinary hearing allowed him to clearly hear this sentence as soon as he walked out of the restaurant. Meg? Sure enough, high favorability was enough to beautify everything. Why are these two guys suddenly so close? Is it a new script from the program? But didn't she refuse to be a couple with me before? She also said that she doesn't like to date on the program, even if it's fake. Iman bit into the biscuit with a puzzled expression. Meg had realized that yesterday's incident had greatly increased his favorability among passers-by, including men. People couldn't find the judge, so he, as the fuse, naturally took over this wave of popularity. "I'm just rubbing myself. There's nothing wrong with that." After breakfast, Meg went to the contestants' lounge to wait for his makeup and some pre-match preparations. Although Meg, as a straight man, was a little disgusted by all kinds of things being applied to his face, this was a program after all. There was no need to make things difficult for the staff. "Your skin is so good. You just need to add some makeup to suit the camera. The girl who did Meg's makeup blushed all the way, but she didn't forget to praise his good skin. Thank you. Meg responded with a smile. It was ridiculous to see her favorability increase from 80 to 88. After the makeup was done, the makeup artist put away her tools and couldn't help but ask carefully, "Can I take a picture with you?" "Sure." Meg nodded. The makeup artist immediately raised her wristband and clicked on the selfie mode. She carefully approached Meg and quickly completed the selfie. Then, she thanked Meg with a blushing face. "Thank you. Thank you for your hard work." Meg nodded slightly. His wristband vibrated slightly. Meg raised his hand and glanced at it. It was a message from the program, explaining the rules of today's competition. "You go ahead." The makeup artist happily took her things and left. Meg opened the message and was a little surprised. Chapter 2454. This time, the program team was going to do something new. The original rule that the contestants were free to choose the dishes provided by the program team had been changed. The program team would provide a fixed amount of funds and the contestants would have to go to the shopping mall on the first floor of the basement to buy their own ingredients. During this process, the program team would film the whole process and broadcast it live. The time spent buying ingredients would also be included in the total time, but it would still be 2 hours. This could be said to be a very interesting change. Meg could roughly guess that this was a test of the contestants' ability to choose ingredients. Of course, if the ingredients prepared by the program team were of the highest quality, he would pretend that he didn't say anything. Besides, this could also be a publicity stunt by the Mocha Group. After all, it was such an influential program where the top 4 contestants would buy ingredients live. This kind of publicity was beyond the imagination of ordinary advertisers. Why did the rules suddenly change? I actually have to buy ingredients myself. In the dressing room next door, Iman was shocked when he saw the new news. He looked a little nervous. Although he had been a chef for many years, he had always stayed in the kitchen of Tucker Hotel. They had professional suppliers, so there was no need for the chef to buy ingredients personally. Now that the program team had suddenly added this rule, it undoubtedly put a little pressure on him. Don't be nervous. I've already asked around. This is a method by the Mocha Group to attract customers to their shopping malls. The shopping malls will definitely have the best ingredients. You just have to find the ingredients you need as soon as possible. You can choose whatever you want, comforted his agent who was beside him. Understood. Iman nodded. That was right, he definitely couldn't ruin his reputation in the shopping mall. Angelina, who had just finished her makeup, also clicked on the news with a look of anticipation. Interesting. I didn't expect such a new rule. Shopping malls are only for the rich. This kind of shopping experience isn't common. At the same time, the live broadcast of the Chef King competition began. The scene started with the contestants finishing their makeup and receiving the news of the change in the rules. The camera cut to the venue. I didn't expect the rules to be changed. I was wondering why the contestants weren't present today. I didn't expect the producers to hide it from the judges so thoroughly, said Dave with a smile. This rule is a new breakthrough. Letting the contestants walk out of the restaurant and choose the ingredients themselves is a test of their ability to choose ingredients. This is a very important ability for a chef. Old Hunter nodded. This is the Mocha Shopping Mall. It provides the best ingredients and is also the special supplier of all the major catering groups. It's harder than winning the lottery if you want to choose unqualified ingredients from here. Another judge took over the conversation with a smile and started the first wave of advertisements. The judges opened the show with idle chatter to liven up the atmosphere of the show. However, an interesting phenomenon appeared in the live broadcast rooms of the Chef King tournament. Due to Horace's incident, the popularity of the Chef King tournament had reached a new height. The number of viewers in the official live stream room was actually lower than Hades's live stream room. The number of viewers was 500 million and 550 million respectively. I've switched on the dual screen mode. I'm watching Brother Hades's solo show while listening to the judges chatter. I've already turned off the main live stream. Listening to a bunch of greasy middle-aged men chatting is affecting my ability to see handsome guys. She cooks so well and has such a sense of justice. She's even so good-looking. I'm in love. Everyone else is surprised. Only my brother is calm. The bullet screen was flooded with comments. The number of viewers in the two live stream rooms was still increasing rapidly. A staff member entered the dressing room and informed Meg that the live stream had begun. He motioned for Meg to turn off his bracelet and followed the staff member to the shopping mall on the first floor. Meg cooperated and turned off his bracelet. He glanced at the camera in the corner of the dressing room. He wondered if any contestants were caught in the live stream. The 4 contestants gathered outside the elevator. Meg nodded politely and stood quietly. Iman and Potas greeted him with a smile as if they had known each other for a long time. When they met in the restaurant in the morning, they still looked like they didn't know him. Meg looked down and hid the smile in his eyes. He didn't intend to perform too much in front of the camera. However, the girl next to him didn't think so. She walked towards Meg and deliberately quickened her pace. She stopped in front of Meg and said with a blushing face, "Mr. Hades, the new rules must not be stressful for you." Meg didn't expect Angelina to take the initiative to talk to him in front of the camera. But since she asked, he couldn't avoid it. He could only smile politely and say, "Choosing ingredients is a chef's basic skill. It's indeed not stressful. My mother used to say the same thing to me." Angelina's eyes lit up. She looked at Meg with more and more admiration. She was a little embarrassed and said, "But I have trouble choosing. I think I'll be dazzled. I don't agree to this marriage. What's wrong with this girl? Why did her relationship suddenly increase? It's so awkward. Where's my aloof goddess Angelina? Why did she suddenly become a little fangirl? And a little muddle-headed? Ha ha ha, it's my first time watching this show. Am I the only one who thinks that these two are quite compatible? No. I'm not a fan of this couple. Brother Hades is mine." The bullet screen suddenly exploded. At the scene, Nancy also cast a questioning look at Johnny. Johnny spread his hands with a confused expression, indicating that he didn't know what was going on. In the early stages of the show, he did think of arranging a couple for Angelina, who was very good-looking and strong, to increase the popularity of the contestants. However, this proposal was rejected by Angelina because she didn't want to be a couple. The victim, Iman, was still on the stage. But now, Angelina suddenly took the initiative to approach Hades and did something that was inconsistent with her character. Hades's amazing operation yesterday had indeed brought great popularity to the show. But now, the whole internet regarded him as the incarnation of justice. Even the number of viewers in the personal live stream was higher than the main live stream. At this time, Angelina's actions might not bring about a couple's fans, but more doubts and criticism. However, discussion was popularity. Seeing the feedback from the technical staff, Johnny quickly dismissed the idea of reminding Angelina. "Wow, this woman is actually trying to get close to my man." On the top floor of the Twin Towers, a collie sat up straight and looked at Angelina. Then she made an evaluation. Her butt isn't as perky as mine, her breasts aren't as big as mine, and she doesn't have as much money as me. She's not a threat. End of chapter. Chapter 24:55. Meg maintained a certain distance from Angelina's deliberate closeness. He couldn't figure out what this woman was thinking. The show had progressed to the semi-finals. She was currently ranked first with her strong and stable strength and popularity. This was no longer the stage where the contestants had to compete for popularity with their own abilities. There was no need for her to stick close to him at this time. Instead, it would put her image in jeopardy. Meg even suspected that this woman had ulterior motives towards him. Otherwise, her behavior would be too abnormal and not in line with the abilities she had shown before. The elevator was stable. Meg stepped into it first and stood in the innermost corner. Meg thought that Angelina would back off, but he didn't expect her to step into the elevator before Iman and Potas and stand beside Meg. Meg suddenly understood why idols hated the so-called obsessive fans so much. Although the other party was a beautiful girl, it was still quite annoying to delay his mission. As if she saw the indifference in Meg's eyes, Angelina took half a step back and lowered her eyes slightly. She looked at Meg with some worry and puzzlement. Her lips moved, but she held back from continuing to talk to Meg. Meg breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, this woman wasn't to the extent where she didn't know how to read people's faces. The elevator descended steadily from the 300th floor to the basement. Iman took the initiative to chat with Angelina in a gentlemanly manner, but the latter wasn't interested. Her eyes were always on Meg. That person looks like a dog. I feel sorry for Iman for 3 seconds, but this sudden relationship. It's really a little confusing. You're always tempted by what you can't get, and those who are favored have nothing to fear. Iman's participation increased the show's effect a lot, and the comments became more lively. Potas looked at the three of them and hesitated to speak. In the end, he chose to smile without saying anything. The circle of rich people was too messy, and he really didn't know how to intervene. It only took 30 seconds for the elevator to reach the basement. The group got out of the elevator and received the amount of money for the competition from the staff. 100,000 card coins. This was the amount of money that the contestants had received to buy ingredients. It was extremely extravagant to spend 100,000 yuan on ingredients to cook a dish. But for the contestants of the Chef King tournament, the cut was simply unacceptable. Both Iman and Potas had puzzled expressions on their faces. One had to know that from the moment they entered the top 16, any of the main ingredients provided by the production team was worth hundreds of thousands of copper coins. Including the side dishes, it was normal for the price of ingredients to exceed 1,000,000 copper coins. But now that it was the semi-finals, his budget had fallen instead of rising. He was only left with 100,000 yuan. So generous. Meg was a little surprised. After all, it was just a dish. 100,000 copper coins gave him the feeling that it was quite sufficient. Take the charcoal grilled lamb chops he made yesterday as an example. The price of a Mongolian sheep was only 20,000 copper coins, and he only took 12 lamb chops, so the total price would not exceed 5,000 copper coins. As for the dishes he was going to cook today, he had already decided in the elevator just now. All he needed to do was to look for the ingredients he needed later. After taking the shopping card, Meg swiped an automatic shopping cart and entered the supermarket. Angelina's expression was equally calm. After taking the shopping card, she glanced at Meg's back and walked quickly into the supermarket as well. Meg quickly found the fresh section through the index on the shopping cart, then found the beef section. Mocha's supermarket was a large high-end supermarket targeted at the small bourgeoisie. There was a wide variety of high-end ingredients and there were hundreds of types of beef based on the place of origin and location. The beef here was butchered and placed on the shelves. The cuts were perfect and could be cooked directly after purchase. However, Meg walked around and reached out to test the temperature of a few types of beef. He shook his head in disappointment and turned to the inquiry button on the shopping cart. He asked, "Where can I get warm beef?" "This little cart doesn't understand what you're talking about. Can you repeat it?" replied the shopping cart in a gentle female voice. "Is this artificial retard?" Meg pursed his lips. "Hello, is there anything I can help you with?" The artificial intelligence was turned off and a real artificial voice came in. "I want to buy warm beef that was slaughtered less than an hour ago. Can you provide it here?" asked Meg directly. "Please wait a moment, I need to make some inquiries," replied the voice. On the other hand, in the control center of Mocha's supermarket, the customer service supervisor looked at the supermarket's general manager. "We have our own slaughterhouse on the 38th floor. A batch of high-quality silver-horned bison just arrived yesterday. If he wants it, we can send it to the supermarket in 10 minutes, said the supervisor of the slaughterhouse as he stood up. "Okay, then promise him. No matter what he wants, as long as it's in the main city, we can get it for him," ordered the manager. The customer service manager nodded and reconnected the call. "Hello, dear customer. According to your request, we can provide customized service for you. What you need is a piece of beef that has been slaughtered for less than an hour and that still retains its body temperature, right? Do you have any other requirements for the beef's part, weight and breed?" "I need the hind leg of a silver-horned bison that weighs about 1,500 kilograms. The weight is 1.5 kilograms. Meg said. He had just asked the system to check the supermarket's order list. The ingredients were ready-made and the price was reasonable. It just met his requirements. "Okay, please wait a moment. The ingredients you need will be sent to you in 10 minutes. Is there anything else you need help with?" "No, thank you." Meg turned off the voice inquiry and walked to the seafood section according to the index. In 10 minutes, Meg bought 2 kilograms of ordinary whitewater prawns, 2 pieces of pork skin in the promotional section, a few common side dishes, and the warm beef that was sent to him on time. The total cost was less than 3,000 copper coins. This is the so-called warm beef. The meat is bright red and has a lot of elasticity. It still retains the body temperature of the cow. Of course, you can use any kind of beef as a substitute, but it's better to choose the more elastic hind leg meat. Meg showed the beef that he just received to the camera and smiled. "Now that the ingredients have been purchased, I have to go back to the site to cook." Wow, isn't this saving a lot of money for the program? He only spent 2,800 copper coins for 100,000. I feel so immersed watching Hades shopping. He buys everything cheaply. 2,800 for ingredients seems to be an acceptable price. Do you rich people shop in the market like this? That's a month's worth of food expenses, including the gas. While others are still worried about the lack of funds, Hades has already returned with a full load. I feel like he knows what he wants to buy from the moment he stepped into the supermarket. The comments quickly flashed by, mostly praising Meg. At the same time, in the seafood section, Iman was looking at the 2 fish in the 2 fish tanks with a distressed expression. Which one should I choose? Iman scratched his head with a conflicted expression. Potas in the meat section had a similar expression. At this time, he already had a variety of ingredients in his shopping cart, but he also had difficulty choosing the main ingredient. He couldn't make up his mind for a long time. Angelina was very efficient in choosing ingredients, but she seemed to need to buy a lot of ingredients. Half of her shopping cart was already filled, but she was still looking for something. I didn't expect the slowest contestant to buy ingredients yesterday to be Meg, the most efficient one today, said Dave as he looked at Meg, who was the first to enter the elevator to return to the main venue. Julian shook his head and said, "It's obvious that the limits of a chef's vision are obvious. Even if he got 100,000 copper coins, he still couldn't choose the best ingredients at this price. I feel that from the moment he stepped into the supermarket, he already knew what ingredients he needed. Expensive doesn't mean the best, let alone the best ingredients for the dishes he chose. Old Hunter immediately retorted, "The price of whitewater prawn isn't outstanding among the various prawns because it's easy to catch and there are a lot of them. It's not because it tastes worse than other prawns. I personally think it can be ranked in the top 3 of the seafood list. It's also a common seafood that ordinary people often eat." On the other hand, some contestants are completely disrupted by the new rules. They don't even know what ingredients they need after they start to choose the ingredients. It's worrying. Julian's face turned red. Naturally, he could tell that Old Hunter was hinting at him on. As his master, he was naturally unhappy. He said coldly, "Prawn and beef are 2 completely opposite ingredients. I'd like to see what kind of tricks he can come up with." Seeing that the two of them were getting more and more aggressive, Nancy chuckled and said, "It's the first time I've seen a chef cook with ingredients less than 3,000 copper coins in the semi-finals. I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of food he can make." Julian glanced at Nancy and didn't say anything, but his face darkened a little. Judging from Nancy's attitude towards Hades, she seemed to be very interested in this newcomer. This was a little disadvantageous for Iman in the finals. This was the first time he'd let his disciple participate in the competition. One of the reasons was that he'd gotten the list of contestants in advance and confirmed that there weren't any famous or powerful chefs on it. That was why he'd let Iman participate in the competition. The competition was considered one of the top competitions in the industry, and the champion had the opportunity to become a special chef of McCarthy Manor. Just as he'd expected, Iman, who'd inherited his skills, had passed all the obstacles and successfully entered the quarterfinals. According to the original plan, his only opponent was Angelina. As long as he won by surprise, he'd have a chance to turn the tables in the finals. But now, Hades had appeared out of nowhere. He'd come in 3rd place with a big gap in online ratings, less than 1 point behind Iman. Julian didn't know what dish Meg would cook today, but judging from the current situation, Meg, who'd chosen an ordinary piece of beef and 2 kilograms of ordinary whitewater prawn, seemed to be less competitive. Meg returned to the venue. There were only 4 operating desks left in the venue, on which the names and numbers of the semi-finalists were written. Meg first greeted the judges, then returned to the operating desks. "Contestant Hades, we see that you've chosen your ingredients very quickly and returned to the venue. Everyone is curious about one thing. What dish are you planning to cook today?" Using silverhorn beef and whitewater prawn sounds like 2 completely different ingredients. "Also, why did you choose these 2 ingredients?" asked Dave curiously as he looked at Meg. This was probably one of the questions that the judges and audience were more curious about. Silverhorn bison is produced in the Chihua Prairie. Its meat is excellent, but its price is much lower than other high-quality beef. It's a low-cost, high-quality beef. The piece I chose is a hind leg with relatively less fascia and fat, and it's warm-bodied beef that was slaughtered less than half an hour ago. Whitewater prawn is delicious, delicate, and smooth. It's the best among prawns, and it won't change just because of its low price. The whitewater prawn I chose is produced in the southern region of Whitewater. The water quality there is better, and the whitewater prawn produced is of a higher quality. As for the dish I'm going to cook today, I'll keep it a secret for now. When it's done, it'll be revealed, answered Meg with a smile as he took out his tools one by one and placed them on the operating desks. A sturdy wooden block, 2 large iron rods that looked like murder weapons, and 2 transparent glass pots. The judges nodded as they listened to Meg's words. From Meg's answers, they could tell that he had a deep understanding of the ingredients he chose. He didn't choose cheap ingredients on purpose, but chose the ones with the highest cost-performance ratio. After witnessing the extreme case of him cooking an ordinary lamb chop into a delicious dish yesterday, the judge's evaluation became more cautious. As a judge, they had to be unafraid of being slapped in the face, but being slapped in the face on the show was indeed not something to be proud of. Meg watched the teaching video that the class representative had compiled yesterday. While he gave the editor a thumbs up, he also felt sorry for him for a few seconds. Therefore, he still didn't do a live commentary today. As an idol, being cool was the most important thing. He boiled the pig's skin in a pot of water, and he needed to make a pot of meat jelly. He didn't rush to deal with the fresh white water prawn. He washed the beef that still had the body temperature of a bison, removed some fascia and fat, and then picked up the 2 iron rods on the wooden block and began to beat it. Dong dong dong. The iron rods hit the beef, making a pleasant sound, as if a high-quality drum was being beaten. The extremely fresh beef trembled slightly on the wooden block, as if it was undergoing an irresistible hammering massage. At first glance, it looked a bit like a murder scene. But if one looked carefully, the beef was being hammered by the iron rods that weighed dozens of kilograms, but there was no scene of flesh and blood flying. The fresh beef was tightly adhered, and became more and more sticky as it was hammered. It was changing shape at a speed visible to the naked eye. What is he doing? The judges and the audience were all confused. End of chapter. Chapter 2456. Angelina, Iman, and the other contestants also returned to the arena one after another after a round of shopping. As soon as they entered the arena, they saw Mag waving 2 big iron rods and hammering a piece of beef crazily. They were all shocked. It was originally a somewhat comical and violent scene, but Meg made it look quite artistic and beautiful. The iron rods, which weighed dozens of kilograms, were like 2 light wooden sticks in his hands. The speed at which he waved them was quite astonishing. The beating sounds were as dense as raindrops falling to the ground. The iron rods left afterimages behind, making it difficult for the audience to follow them with their eyes. Meg's expression remained calm, as if he was doing a very simple and ordinary thing. What is he doing? Is he hammering the beef? Iman's workstation was still next to Meg. He couldn't help but mutter in his heart as he placed the ingredients he had purchased on the workstation. In the end, he chose a rainbow fish, which was more than half a meter long. It cost him 90,000 copper coins, which took up the majority of the budget. If it was an adult rainbow fish, 100,000 copper coins wouldn't be enough at all. Tucker's Grand Hotel was most famous for its all-fish banquet. As Julian's favorite student, he also had good cooking skills when it came to fish. In the previous competitions, he deliberately held back. Yesterday's quarterfinals was just a small test of his skills by making a steamed yellow dragon fish. Today was the time for him to really show his skills. When he got up in the morning, he deliberately checked Hades's online PK value. The converted score had reached 7 points, which was only 2 points away from him. He had to show his true skills today. Otherwise, if Meg got another high score of 95, he would have to say goodbye to this competition. Hades also spent 100,000 copper coins and chose a high-quality golden lamb leg. This kind of 6th-level major monster was not common. Its meat was delicious and was very popular. Angelina only spent half of her budget, leaving her with more than 40,000 copper coins. However, she brought back a whole cart of ingredients, which was almost as much as the other 3 contestants combined. As usual, the taster commented on the ingredients chosen by the 3 contestants. At this time, nearly half an hour had passed. The contestants didn't dare to delay and quickly went into cooking mode. Meg repeated the boring hammering like an emotionless hammering machine. How many times has it been? 10,932 times. When I sent this comment, it should have increased by 12 times. What is he trying to do? Beat the beef into minced meat. But it's a job that can be done in 3 seconds with the mincing machine. Making simple cooking complicated. This is probably Hades's culinary philosophy. The audience gradually became numb. They were so bored that they started counting the number of hits. While Meg was hammering, he paid attention to the condition of the pigskin in the pot. When the broth became pure white and sticky, he immediately turned off the heat. After pouring the thick pig skin soup into the shallow mold, he fished out the white water prawns from the water tank at the side. With a wave of his hand, strips of skinless white water prawns with their intestines removed appeared on the chopping board. After that, he minced the prawns into a smooth prawn sauce, mixed it with the thick soup, and placed it directly into the freezer to cool down. That's right. Meg planned to make the famous bursting pissing beef meatball today. This famous snack was one of Meg's favorite dishes in his previous life. As for why he chose it as the dish for the semi-finals, it was because of its outstanding performance on the spot. Meg had exchanged the recipe from the system. He hadn't officially entered the test field for the god of cookery to learn. However, after this period of practice, he had mastered the experience of a master and a detailed recipe. Meg was quite confident that he would succeed on his first try. The bursting pissing beef meatball and the meatball were both very important. The quality of the white water prawns was far better than the mantis prawns, and the hammering of the beef by hand gave the beef a soul compared to the wall-breaking machine. It used the chef's experience to ensure that the beef was in the best condition during the hammering. The iron rod in Meg's hand was specially made. It weighed 40 kilograms. It didn't feel good to hold a 7-kilogram iron rod, which affected his performance. The beef gradually turned into minced meat under the iron rod, but Meg didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. A large pot of beef bone soup was boiling in the side. The large beef bone was ordinary, and the fragrance gradually drifted out of it wasn't outstanding. On the other hand, Iman, who was processing the sea rainbow fish, had already finished slaughtering the colorful fish. The various side dishes used all kinds of fancy knife skills, and it was very pleasing to the eye, attracting the attention of many people. Of course, the most anticipated one was Angelina. This girl, known as the kitchen magician, was processing the ingredients on her workbench that almost filled up the whole place. What was surprising was that there was no meat in her ingredients. They were all vegetables. They're all vegetarian. What kind of surprise is Angelina going to bring us today? I'm really curious, said David in surprise. David exclaimed in surprise. Apparently, the judges had only realized this after she had laid out all the ingredients. It wasn't that meat dishes were mandatory in the King of Cookery competition, but compared to the relatively lighter and less malleable vegetarian dishes, meat had a higher upper limit. There were contestants who made vegetarian dishes in the show, but the results were not satisfactory. Today was the key semi-finals, and the final 2 finalists would be decided. It was indeed a little surprising that Angelina chose to make an all-vegetarian dish. Iman and Padas couldn't help but look in Angelina's direction when they heard that, and a hint of joy flashed in their eyes. Angelina was undoubtedly the most competitive contestant on the field now. Whether it was her full score or her unconstrained imagination, it was hard for the other contestants to compare with her. They didn't expect her to choose an all-vegetarian dish today. Did she forget to bring the main ingredients? An all-vegetarian dish. Interesting. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. He didn't think there was anything wrong with Angelina choosing to make a vegetarian dish. A boiled cabbage dish could be on the state banquet menu, but a vegetarian dish really couldn't. It was just the chef who made the dish that couldn't make it. In the marshal's office in the defense building. Ferdinand looked at the live broadcast on the projection screen with a smile on his face. Based on Shi's feedback over the past 2 days, this little guy was very adaptable to life in the dungeon. He could even come up with a way to increase his popularity in such a short time, quickly gain Nancy's favor, and obtain a pass to enter the McCarthy family. Interesting little guy. I'd like to see what kind of changes you can bring to the dungeon. Ferdinand closed the live broadcast interface and called his secretary. Marshal, there's a letter from the presidential palace asking for your opinion on the Dixon family's money laundering. End of chapter. Chapter 2457. Our Mr. President actually took the initiative to ask for my opinion. That's really a rare thing. Ferdinand smiled and said, then tell them that I support Mr. President's decision and actions to uphold the law. After the call ended, Ferdinand got up and walked to the window. He looked down at the huge military base and fell into deep thought. In the west of Tucker City, in the square building that symbolized the administrative center of the underground city, in an Oval Office, a thin middle-aged man in a black suit sat behind the desk, listening attentively to the work report of the burly man sitting opposite him. Mr. President. The secretary walked into the office quickly and interrupted the conversation between the two men. He walked quickly to the side of the middle-aged man and said in a low voice, Marshal Ferdinand has given his answer. The president got up and shook hands with the burly man. Carmen, I'm glad you've returned to Tucker City. Go home and reunite with your wife and children. I'll need you soon. Carmen bowed slightly and said, I'll be at your command at any time. Then he left the office. What did Ferdinand say? The president looked at the secretary and asked. The marshal said that he supports your decision and actions to uphold the law, the secretary quickly replied and showed him the reply letter. He really can't stand the way these guys do things, the president said in a low voice. Get ready, I'm going to hold a cabinet meeting. The beautiful sound of drums accompanied me to sleep. When the dishes are done, remember to kick me. Although I still don't know what he's doing, I can say with certainty that this guy's arm strength is really amazing. I can be sure that he won't be roasting beef today. You all know how to praise him for being handsome, but I just feel sorry for my brother's hands. The number of viewers in Meg's personal broadcast room had exceeded 800 million. Because the process of beating beef was too boring, and it was not as pleasant as the words of the judges, the number of viewers in the program's main broadcast room had reached 1.2 billion. Nancy looked at Meg carefully. She was also curious about what dish Meg was going to cook. Like the others, she thought that Meg was going to roast some kind of meat today. When he was wandering around the beef section in the morning, she thought that he was going to roast beef today. However, he didn't expect that after buying the beef, he didn't take out the grill today. Instead, he cooked a portion of pork skin, chopped 2 pounds of white water prawns, and used 2 iron rods to beat the beef crazily. Even though the 10 judges on the stage were experienced and knowledgeable, none of them could guess what he was planning to do. On the other hand, Iman had already put the fish into the pot. Judging from the cooking method, he was going to make braised rainbow fish, one of the signature dishes of Tucker Hotel. After Potus's golden lamb leg was marinated, he put it into the oven. It looked like he was planning to make a roasted lamb leg. It was unknown if it had anything to do with Meg's roasted lamb chop getting high marks yesterday. Angelina's situation was somewhat similar to Meg's. Her selection of ingredients was quite chaotic, and so far, no judge could determine what dish she wanted to cook. Of course, this was also her specialty. Before she really completed this dish, no one knew if she would turn a pheasant into a phoenix. As time passed, the aroma of the braised fish gradually slipped out of the pot, attracting covetous gazes. Tucker Hotel, which had thousands of years of history and heritage, had always been regarded as one of the top restaurants in the underground city. As the head chef, Julian also had a very high status in the culinary world. To be able to join Tucker Hotel and become Julian's direct disciple, Iman's talent could be imagined. The so-called braised rainbow fish was a common name. This dish was called rainbow fish in Tucker Hotel and was priced at 500,000 copper coins per serving. It couldn't be ordered in the restaurant, so it had to be pre-ordered in advance. This was one of the signature dishes of Tucker Hotel, so the live broadcast video had some confidentiality on the details of the cooking process. This was also the reason why Julian could let this dish appear in the competition. He even brought out the signature dish of Tucker Hotel. Master Julian, your disciple is determined to get a place in the finals. David looked at Julian with a smile. If he learns well, he should be a place in the finals. If he doesn't learn well, there's nothing to say about him not being on the list, said Julian calmly. Well said, Old Heng said in a sarcastic tone. The judges wanted to laugh, but they had to hold it in for Julian's sake. Julian's words were indeed good. If Iman made it to the finals, it meant that he had learned well, and it was also because he taught him well. If Iman didn't make it to the finals, it was because he didn't learn well. What did it have to do with Julian? Julian snorted softly and didn't argue with Old Hunter. At this moment, Pada's golden roast lamb leg was becoming more and more golden in the transparent oven. The aroma of the roast lamb slowly drifted over, faintly competing with the fragrance of the fish. Nancy's nose twitched, and he shook his head slightly. Although the aroma of the roast lamb was strong, it was completely incomparable to the lamb chop that Hades had roasted yesterday. The layers of aroma created by the seasoning were beyond his reach. Moreover, card-copying charcoal roast lamb chop dominated the trending search list yesterday. Everyone from ordinary people to first-tier food bloggers participated in it, forming a shocking trend of checking in. This had never happened in the past few years of the King of Cooks competition. This also gave Nancy some new ideas. Delicious food made with ordinary ingredients was closer to life for more people, and it would make them resonate and have the desire to try it. In the eyes of ordinary people, the golden roast lamb leg was an ingredient that was impossible to buy, but even ordinary people could eat it occasionally. Perhaps Padas felt that he had found the secret to wealth through inspiration, but he didn't know that if he brought out a similar dish, he would be more likely to make a fool of himself. Angelina was the one who attracted the most attention. Angelina, who had brought a cart full of vegetarian dishes, placed a huge mountain of meat on a huge plate. Thick steak, sliced roast chicken, strips of lamb chops. They were piled up into a mountain of meat, and it was a spectacular sight. Wow, my God! Is this the legendary magician among chefs? Where did she make all this meat from? Oh my God, she made a pure meat dish with pure vegetarian dishes. This is amazing. She's an artist. It's a waste of her talent to be a chef. This is imitation meat, but it's so real that it can't be seen with the naked eye at all. The audience was shocked, and a large number of people flooded into Angelina's personal live stream. End of chapter. Chapter 24:58. More than half of the time had passed. As Angelina and the other two contestants started to cook, the atmosphere gradually became tense. Ding! With a crisp, retro sound, Padas opened the oven and took out the golden lamb leg that was roasted until it was golden and shiny. The rich aroma of roasted lamb swept through the venue, attracting everyone's attention. The director also zoomed in on the lamb leg at the right time, giving it a perfect display. The lamb leg glowed with a faint oily sheen, as if it was shining gold. It shone brightly under the light. Vigorous golden goats rarely had any natural enemies on the grassland. Their vigorous speed allowed them to avoid most of the top predators, and this also resulted in their top-notch lamb leg. The color of this golden lamb leg is amazing. As expected of Mocha Mall, you can actually find such top-notch ingredients, and the price is much cheaper than expected, praised Dave, licking his sponsor's cheek without leaving a trace. Judging from its color and unique aroma, the quality of this golden leg of lamb is indeed extremely high. The value of the ingredients is reflected in all aspects, and it's indeed not something that ordinary lamb can compare to. This is also a test of a chef's ability to choose ingredients. Arya nodded as he intentionally glanced in Mag's direction. These words were more or less targeted, and the judges' faces showed a hint of playfulness. Almost at the same time, Iman's rainbow fish was also out of the pot. The moment the lid was lifted, the bright colors of the rainbow made everyone's eyes light up. The exquisite plate presentation raised the beauty of the dish to another level. Padas and Iman raised their hands one after another to signal that they had finished cooking. A whole golden roasted lamb leg was placed on a retro wooden plate, and the edges were decorated with a little green vegetables. It set off the main character to the greatest extent, and was quite visually impactful. Iman's rainbow fish, on the other hand, was exquisitely decorated. The half-meter-long rainbow fish was embellished, and coupled with the fish's beautiful fur, it looked as if it was covered in a layer of colorful light. It was dreamy and breathtaking. Meg took the time to look at their dishes. There was nothing much to say about Padas' golden roasted lamb leg. It was a seemingly perfect dish made with precision kitchen utensils. In other words, it was fine as long as one had hands. Other than the fact that the ingredients themselves were precious, the entire roasting process, be it the seasoning or the technique, was not very competitive. Obviously, this young man wanted to continue the popularity of his roast lamb chops from yesterday. Perhaps he thought that he could get a high score from the judges by choosing a top-notch lamb leg. Iman's 7-colored rainbow fish caught his attention. Whether it was the overall presentation or the fragrance, it was much better than yesterday's steamed fish. Amy should like it. After all, it's a rainbow fish. I can bring them a few when I go back. Meg was already thinking about the local specialties he would bring back. The rules of the competition remained the same. Those who finished first would go up on stage to be tasted and commented by the judges. Padas' roasted lamb leg was first on the big wheel. The judges praised the golden lamb leg, but they didn't show much interest or recognition for this dish. At the scene, the judges were either top chefs or well-known food critics. This level of roast lamb leg was not surprising at all. Whether it was the aroma or the cooking process, it could not be compared to Meg's charcoal roast lamb chop yesterday. The judges knew what Padas was thinking. Although they didn't point it out, they couldn't praise it either. The staff cut the lamb leg into small portions and presented them to the judges. The judges tasted them separately, and most of them said some pretty words that didn't matter. If none of you are going to say it, then I will. Contestant Padas, your roast lamb leg looks pretty good. The golden lamb leg is indeed very suitable for roasting. It's also a very classic method. Old Hunter put down the fork in his hand and looked at Padas with a serious expression. However, this method of roasting can be found in any restaurant that has roasted lamb legs. The only difference is that you're using a rare golden lamb leg. It can be said very clearly that this golden roast lamb leg didn't surprise me at all. The overly ordinary seasoning even made me feel that you wasted this high-quality lamb leg. Padas, who originally thought that he did well, suddenly had an ugly expression. His lips moved, and he chose to remain silent. Yes, the taste of this roast lamb leg is extremely ordinary. Because it wasn't marinated properly, there is an obvious layer of flavor. This is very bad. Nancy only took a small bite before putting down her fork and knife. She said with an indifferent expression, "There is still half an hour." If this time was used to marinate a thick lamb chop, there would definitely be a different result. Although the first dish to be presented might get a higher score because there is no comparison, the chef's attitude towards this dish is what the judges value. Nancy's evaluation made Pottis's face pale. He knew Nancy's identity and right to speak. This evaluation was equivalent to directly shutting him out of the finals. As expected, the judges gave a score. Pottis's score was only 75, which directly broke the lowest score of the previous semifinals. Pottis stood to the side with an ashen face. This score was a disgrace. Not only did it make it impossible for him to enter McCarthy Manor, it would also have some negative effects on his future path as a celebrity. Iman's throat rolled, and his expression became a bit nervous. The judges today seemed very strict, and even Miss Nancy, who usually didn't judge the contestants, gave such a harsh evaluation. It was a bit scary. Wow, I feel that Miss Nancy is super strict today. Those who are slacking off will probably be killed directly. I still like old Mr. Hunter's style of commenting. If he doesn't like it, just say it directly. He's not like the other judges who care about their faces and don't want to offend people. This competition has suddenly entered the semi-final stage. Who will be eliminated? It still feels very suspenseful. The audience's interest was aroused by this wave of surprise, and the bullet screen increased by a lot. The golden roast lamb leg was taken down, and only a small piece was eaten. Iman's rainbow fish was brought up on stage next. This was the famous signature dish of Tucker Hotel. Only VIP guests would order this dish, and it was personally cooked by Julian. It could be considered the most famous dish on the stage of this season's Chef King competition. This dish was the last dish in Julian and Iman's original plan. It could be used as the main dish in the finals. Since Hades, the dark horse, was too strong to be safe, it was used in the semi-finals. To be honest, this is the first time I've seen this rainbow fish with my own eyes. Although it's a baby version, it looks really amazing, David praised as he watched the fish slowly move in front of him. It's all Master Julian's fault for setting the price of this dish too high. A fish that costs 500,000 yuan is really unaffordable, a judge said with a smile. Although the rainbow fish was famous, due to its high price, even with the qualifications of the judges present, Nancy was probably the only one who had personally tasted it because of its high price. It looks like it's done well. The knife skills are exquisite, and the plate presentation is exquisite, Old Hunter nodded and said. After the presentation, the staff took the fish from different positions and put it in front of the judges for them to taste and comment. Old Hunter picked up a piece of fish meat and put it into his mouth. His eyes lit up slightly. Cece savored it and swallowed it. Then, he picked up a piece of fish belly meat and put it into his mouth. The corner of his mouth curled up slightly. Finally, he picked up a piece of meat near the fish head and put it into his mouth. His eyes were already squinting, showing a hint of intoxication. This fish meat is indeed of the highest quality. It's smooth and delicate when it enters the mouth, and with a slight spin on the tip of the tongue, it slips down the throat unconsciously. Only extreme freshness is left in the mouth. Especially the fish head meat, it can be said to be the best of the best. The taste is extremely fresh and contains the essence of the body. With a light bite, I almost bit the tip of my tongue. Old Hunter looked at Iman with a face full of praise. The taste is just right. It doesn't hide the freshness of the fish. To be more precise, it made the taste even better. Thank you. Iman let out a big sigh of relief. Old Hunter and his master didn't get along well on the show. He didn't expect Old Hunter to give him such a good review. It's not easy to get a good review from Old Hunter. But as he said, this rainbow fish is really amazing. It's true that a great teacher produces a great disciple. This is the best fish in this year's King of Cooking competition. David put down his chopsticks and gave Iman a thumbs up. Iman humbly bowed to express his thanks. Although he tried to control his expression, the corner of his mouth couldn't help but curl up. Julian also looked at Iman with a gratified expression. He felt even more proud when he heard the judges praising his disciple. If nothing unexpected happened, Iman had already gotten one of the spots in the finals. Nancy only tasted a piece of fish head meat before putting down her chopsticks with an expressionless face. As a person who had eaten authentic rainbow fish at Tucker Grand Hotel more than once, Iman's baby fish could only be considered average. However, his basic skills were quite solid. It wouldn't be long before he could cook this dish at Tucker Grand Hotel. Of course, this level of skill wasn't enough to make her want to bring it to McCarthy Manor. There was obviously a better master there. If she really wanted to eat rainbow fish at home, all she needed was a phone call to Julian's business alliance. Why would she need to call his disciple back? The judge's high praise gave Iman a score of 93, which was quite high in the King of Cooking competition. I didn't get 95. Iman was a little disappointed. However, this was the highest score he had ever received in the Chef King competition. He was still a little unconvinced that he could not surpass the score of Hades's charcoal roast lamb chop yesterday. However, after deducting the points proportionally and adding 9 points to his park value, he got 92. 7 points, which was much higher than yesterday's score. Iman smiled when he saw the final score. Angelina's threat was still there. After all, he had full PK value. However, Hades was different. Although his online PK value had skyrocketed compared to yesterday, it was currently only about 7 points. According to the current score, if Hades wants to surpass Iman, he'll have to get more than 96 points from the judges. Iman did amazingly well today. I think it'll be difficult for Hades and Angelina to beat him. It seems that Angelina is almost done, but I still can't figure out what dish Hades is going to make. I think he might be going to make a pot of shrimp and beef puree. 25,632 times. Is this man's hand a mechanical arm? At this moment, the number of viewers in the main live stream of the Chef King tournament had exceeded 1.6 billion, and the 7-colored rainbow fish was quite eye-catching. Meg was still beating his beef calmly. The bright red beef had already turned into a puree. It was sticky but didn't lose its texture. He continued to beat it for more than 20,000 times, and it was coming to an end. 26,800 times. This was the number of beatings for the bursting beef meatball in Culinary God. Meg decided to beat it according to this number. On the other hand, Angelina had finished cooking. When she rang the small bell on the table, she looked back in Meg's direction with a hint of worry in her eyes. Iman got a very high score. Although he was quite confident in himself, he couldn't help but worry about Meg. In the Chef King tournament, it was quite difficult to convince 10 judges at the same time. The camera zoomed in on Angelina's result. It was an exquisitely constructed but rugged mountain of meat. Various kinds of meat were stacked into a small hill. The colorful meat was mouth-watering. She made a mountain of meat with a bunch of vegetables. As expected of Angelina, said Dave as he passed by the mountain of meat. David looked at the mountain of meat passing by in front of him with an expression of admiration on his face. Even after observing it closely, I can't tell the difference between it and real meat. Even the aroma of meat has been successfully replicated. This ingenious mind and skill is indeed very creative. This is the first time I've seen the on-site cooking of vegetarian imitation meat. The younger generation will surpass us in time, praised Old Hunter. It was another face-slapping scene that left a deep impression. When everyone thought that she was going to cook a vegetarian dish, she ended up cooking a meat dish with a vegetarian dish. The judges showed great interest in Angelina's dish and praised it. Compared to Iman's perfect performance, that was the rainbow fish created by Aria, after all. As his direct disciple, his performance wasn't very surprising. However, Angelina left enough suspense when she bought the ingredients. In the end, the mountain of meat that she presented completely exceeded everyone's expectations. She was like an artist, and everyone was amazed. This girl is interesting. I've played with her for a while. Meg looked at the mountain of meat with surprise in his eyes. If Angelina behaved normally, he would definitely give her a few more compliments. But this girl's brain seemed a little strange. Was she an idol? End of chapter. Chapter 2459. Not only does this vegetarian imitation chicken drumstick look similar in appearance, its taste is even comparable to that of the phoenix from yesterday. Although one can find traces of the original ingredients after carefully tasting it, it's still very hard to imagine that this is a meat dish made entirely from vegetables. David ate a drumstick and sighed. This technique and creativity is really amazing. I've said this more than once. Angelina will definitely become a chef who won't lose to any of the masters here in the future. She always surprises me with her creativity. This ability is unique among the younger generation of chefs. Old Hunter ate a piece of mutton and was also full of praise. I've seen many chefs who are good at making vegetarian imitation meat, and I have a few friends who are good at it. But I think Angelina's limit will definitely be higher than theirs in the future. This height has nothing to do with technique, it's completely determined by her aesthetic talent, praised a female judge. The judges didn't hide their admiration and praise for Angelina. Their evaluation of her was obviously higher than that of Iman. Compared to Iman, who has a good master, the judges really prefer Miss Angelina, who has her own creativity. Iman's current limit may not reach Julian's level, but the judges see endless possibilities in Angelina. I feel like Iman has suddenly become a little dangerous. I wonder how many points she'll get. She scored full marks in the competition. As the judges began to count down, the audience's curiosity was piqued. When the countdown ended, the judges' scores and the total score appeared on the big screen. Angelina, judges' score, 94. Total score, 94. 6. Temporary first place. There was a burst of exclamations in the audience. It's here. The highest score of this year's Cooking King competition. This score can be ranked among the top in previous Cooking King competitions. As expected of the popular contestant, the judges' score is also higher than Iman's. The bullet screen was flooded with comments, expressing their shock at the score. This. Iman secretly clenched her fists. Although she was a little unconvinced, she still maintained a calm smile on her face. Angelina looked at her score and couldn't hide the joy on her face. She bowed slightly to the judges to express her gratitude, but her eyes quickly turned to Meg. The three contestants had finished cooking one after another. Now, only Meg was left on the stage. The cameras and the audience's eyes were all on Meg. After the last strike, Meg put down the iron rod in his hand. He scooped up the beef that had been beaten into a pile of minced meat and put it into a big bowl. He then added all kinds of spices and seasonings and kneaded them. After removing the fat, tendons, and bones from the delicate and smooth meat paste, with a light pinch, a plump little ball protruded from between the fingers. It was the perfect state. Meg took out the frozen prawn sauce from the freezer, and made a few quick cuts on the plate with a small knife. The prawn sauce was then divided into many small square pieces. He poured warm water into the pot to maintain the temperature. Then, he started to make the explosive pissing meatballs. He grabbed the minced beef with one hand and squeezed a meatball slightly bigger than his thumb from between his thumb and index finger. He gently poked a hole with his finger and stuffed a shrimp paste into it. With a flick of his finger, he smoothed out the hole. The spoon was like a knife between the thumb and the index finger. The round meatball drew a beautiful parabola and gently fell into the pot without splashing water. The Filipino team called him an expert. The series of movements was smooth. Meg held the minced beef in one hand and a spoon in the other. The bright red meatballs almost formed a line in the air and fell into the pot. Is this an acrobatic performance? How can it be so smooth? David couldn't help but get up and move closer. Is he making meatballs? But why did he wrap the frozen shrimp paste in the meatballs? Old Hunter was puzzled. Let's not talk about other things. It's very pleasing to the eye. The female judge next to him had a look of appreciation. Interesting. More than 20,000 times of hammering just to make a meatball? Nancy looked at Meg, who was like an acrobatic master. She smiled and looked forward to it. Maybe he could bring her some new surprises other than the grilled lamb chop. For example, this complicated and strange meatball. It's hard for something so flashy to be elegant. Iman looked at Mag without much worry. If it was just meatballs, he didn't think Meg could beat him. The beef was just ordinary beef, and the shrimp paste was also very ordinary whitewater shrimp. What could he use to beat him? With his acrobatic skills. Brother Justice is awesome. This technique is going to kill all the bloggers in the flipping section. I've eaten meatballs with stuffing, but why did the stuffing have to be frozen first? Newcomer, may I ask if this is the live broadcast of the Chef King tournament? Although I still don't know what he's doing, it doesn't stop me from saying, Brother Justice is awesome. The audience was also a little shocked by Mag's operation. They were a little confused by the repetitive hammering earlier, but the skill of rolling the balls made them feel invigorated. The meatballs in the pot were quickly shaped in the warm water. The round meatballs looked quite cute. Compared to the long hammering time, the meatball rolling time was short and fast. In just a short while, a big lump of beef paste became meatballs floating in the pot. Meg washed his hands and turned off the fire. He scooped up the shaped meatballs from the warm water and put them into the beef bone broth. Meg's strange method of making meatballs successfully attracted the attention of the judges and the audience. Compared to the other contestants' cooking, his cooking was more complicated and more pleasing to the eye. Time passed quickly. Meg turned off the fire and opened the lid. A serving of bursting pissing meatballs was done. The round meatballs were spinning in the soup pot. The fragrance of the beef bone broth came out with the heat. It wasn't strong, but it was fragrant enough. Meg scooped 4 meatballs in a small bowl and added a spoon of broth. He looked at the judges and said, "These are bursting pissing whitewater meatballs. Please have a taste." The staff came forward and brought 10 servings of bursting pissing meatballs to the judges' table. There was no plate. Once it was out of the pot, it was divided into small portions and brought to the judges' table. This method was also quite rare in the Chef King competition. David scooped up a meatball with a spoon and shook his head. Although the whole cooking process is quite strange, this bursting pissing whitewater meatball looks ordinary. There's nothing special about it, whether it's the fragrance or the discomfort. End of chapter. Chapter 2460. The camera slowly zoomed in, but no matter how hard the photographer tried, he still couldn't make this bowl of plain-looking beef meatballs look tempting. David's evaluation was very pertinent. At least on the surface, the meatballs didn't have any special shapes and had an ordinary aroma. They couldn't be compared to Iman and Angelina's creations at all. In fact, they were far inferior to Potus's golden roasted lamb leg. The judges were somewhat disappointed. They had thought that Hades, who had brought them a great surprise yesterday, would bring something different today. However, it seemed that this was not the case. It was just that Nancy seemed to be very interested in him yesterday. They thought that he would be the chosen one and the big dark horse of this competition and enter the finals together with Angelina. But now, with his performance, it was hard for them to go easy on him even if they wanted to. There was a slight smile at the corner of Julian's mouth. Iman had entered the finals and tomorrow was the last battle. As long as he used his trump card, the championship of this year's King of Cooks competition would basically be in his hands. That's it. It looks a little disappointing. A victorious smile appeared on Iman's face. Hades, who had always been on guard against him, had unexpectedly pulled him down in the semi-finals. This meatball looked like the standard of a roadside stall. How could it compare to him? This meatball is much more complicated than yesterday's roasted lamb chop. Brother Hades must have hidden something in it, right? Angelina's hand grabbed the corner of her clothes nervously. She turned to look at Hades, but her heart was full of expectations. What is it? Because he completed the goal in advance, he doesn't plan to continue the competition. Keeping a low profile is not a bad strategy. Maybe he can enter McCarthy Manor a day earlier. She pondered. Damn, this meatball is a little lame. I feel like Brother Justice is going to have to say goodbye. I feel like barbecue is his strong suit. Why did he have to make meatballs today? If he had a golden roasted lamb leg, he should be able to enter the finals smoothly, right? The judges haven't tasted it yet. There's no need to jump to conclusions. Maybe, the taste is worse. The audience was also a little disappointed with Meg's meatballs. After all, the charcoal roasted lamb chop yesterday was amazing enough, and everyone's expectations were high. However, the meatballs now seemed to be far from their expectations. Most people believed that Meg had no chance and might even get an extremely low score. Only Meg remained calm. He didn't explain or argue, only waiting for the judges to taste it. Some things, if you don't try it yourself, it's useless to say anything. Nancy looked at Meg, then looked down at the small bowl in front of her. For meatballs were floating in the pure white beef bone broth. The surface of the meatballs was smooth, and their sizes were almost exactly the same. It was as if they had been standardized by a machine. One had to know that Hades had used his hands to create them one by one. There were a few green onions floating on the surface of the soup. Together with the round meatballs, it looked a little fresh. Seeing the finished product, Nancy was also a little disappointed. However, seeing Meg's calm appearance, she couldn't help but be a little curious. What secrets were hidden in the meatballs that made him so confident? Or was it because he had already gotten a pass to McCarthy Manor, so he was letting himself go on the field? If that was the case, then she might have to reconsider yesterday's decision. The most important thing in a dish is still the taste. Nancy scooped up a meatball with a spoon. The fresh taste of the beef greeted her. It was a very pure fragrance. Then she opened her cherry mouth and gently took a bite of the meatball. Pop! It was the sound of an explosion. Like a balloon full of water being punctured, the fragrant soup spurted out of the small mouth and exploded in Nancy's mouth. Hot! The slightly hot soup frightened the taste buds on the tip of the tongue. However, the fresh fragrance that followed greatly comforted the taste buds. It was the ultimate freshness and sweetness. It blended into the soup like the spring wind and rain, nourishing the frightened taste buds. For the first time, she found that the whitewater shrimp was so fresh and sweet, and the fragrance of the beef mixed in it made the taste buds on the tip of the tongue crazy. Nancy's expression almost went out of control when she saw the soup spurt out of her mouth and the unexpected fragrance of the soup. However, as a professionally trained socialite, she must strictly control her expression and stayed in the live broadcast watched by more than 1 billion people. After a series of anxious and restrained expression changes, Nancy, who gently pursed her lips, couldn't help but let out a soft hum. The judges were paying attention to Nancy, who was the first to taste the meatball. When they heard this sound, their expressions suddenly became a little strange. Miss Nancy rarely lost her composure on the stage. How could she lose her composure in front of this small meatball? Nancy's pretty face turned red. She had been very restrained and even used some skills to suppress her expression, but the instinctive reaction of her body was too strong, making her lose part of her resistance. Nancy glanced at Meg's direction with a little resentment. This guy actually played tricks in the meatball and didn't warn her in advance. Fortunately, she only took a small bite, and the spilled soup was limited. Otherwise, she didn't know how to end it. It was just that the soup was so fresh and delicious that it had completely aroused her appetite. The feeling of being moved was not felt by the previous 4 dishes. Without waiting for a long time, she gently blew at the meatball with her small mouth, and then carefully put the whole meatball into her mouth. This time, she learned to be smart and gently bit into the meatball. The remaining gravy flowed gently in her mouth, but the tender and smooth texture of the meatball amazed her. After being hammered for tens of thousands of times, the beef had become incomparably delicate, but it was precisely because of this special method of hammering that allowed the beef to preserve its muscle fibers extremely well. While it was delicate, it still retained its chewy texture. The pure meatball infinitely magnified the original taste of the beef. It was so charming. At that moment, she seemed to have come to the grassland and seen a herd of strong bison running past. It was the fragrance of the grass, the breath of freedom. The collision of the whitewater shrimp and the beef made the ultimate fresh and sweet taste burst in her mouth in an instant. Her taste buds were wildly agitated, making her feel a great impact. Tear. One of the shoulder straps of Nancy's dress was torn, and the dress slipped down a little, revealing her delicate collarbone. Whoa! The scene was shocked, and Johnson jumped up directly. Chapter 2461. Nancy tasted the bursting whitewater beef meatball, and her shoulder straps actually broke. Such a strong reaction shocked everyone present. Johnson, who had jumped to his feet, turned even paler. An accident on the show was nothing, but if Miss Nancy exposed herself on the show and was watched live by more than 1 billion people, he would really be torn apart. Oh my God! Did he put a bomb in the meatball? Fortunately, it's only the shoulder straps that broke. It's a pity that it's only the shoulder straps that broke. What made a proud girl lose her composure repeatedly? Is it the distortion of human nature, or is the meatball just too delicious? The netizens also had a huge reaction. It looked like an ordinary meatball, so why did Nancy have such a strong reaction when she tasted it? Nancy had always been cold and aloof, and her temperament was perfect for her identity as a rich lady. So, the problem should be with this meatball. The audience couldn't help but wonder what secret this meatball hid that could make Nancy lose her composure on the show. This can't be right. Iman's emotions suddenly became a little complicated. Nancy's reaction was too strong, and it was completely different from the indifferent look she had when she tasted the 3 of them earlier. This made him have an ominous premonition, just like yesterday's grilled lamb chop. Oh! She actually broke Miss Nancy's shoulder straps. It seems that there's really no need to worry at all. Angelina was deep in thought, and her smile brightened a little. Nancy was immersed in the enjoyment brought by the juicy meatball. It wasn't until she swallowed the meatball and opened her eyes that she realized that her shoulder straps had broken. Fortunately, this dress had been designed with unexpected situations in mind, so it was only the shoulder straps that broke. The dress didn't slide down, and there were no more embarrassing situations. However, this was already embarrassing for Nancy. She had never lost her composure in front of others, let alone in a live broadcast with more than 1 billion people watching. As a socialite who had undergone all kinds of advanced training since childhood, although Nancy was embarrassed, she didn't show it on her face. Her slender fingers gently picked up the broken shoulder straps, and a small spell glued them back together. At the same time, she smiled and said, "Even my clothes were shocked by the deliciousness of this meatball. Mr. Hades brought me another surprise and a little shock." As she spoke, she glanced at Meg with some resentment. Meg's eyes were clear and innocent, as if this matter had nothing to do with him. The judges were deep in thought. Miss Nancy's words set the tone for Hades's dish. Since yesterday, Miss Nancy had shown great interest and extra care for Hades. He didn't know if this bursting whitewater beef meatball was really as delicious as she said, or if she was just deliberately showing it to let Hades get a good result. "Let me have a taste. I want to see if this meatball is as fake as Miss Nancy said." Old Hunter scooped up a meatball and put it into his mouth. The meatball exploded in his mouth, and the soup splattered everywhere. It was so hot that he wanted to spit it out. How was this a surprise? This was simply a shock. However, the deliciousness of the broth immediately bloomed. The fresh and sweet whitewater prawn sauce with a bit of oily fragrance comforted the frightened taste buds, blooming with a surprising fresh taste. Old Hunter, who didn't have high expectations, was shocked. So this is the so-called bursting whitewater beef meatball. He used the broth after cooking the pork skin and added the prawn sauce to condense it into jelly, then wrapped it in the meatball. During the cooking process, the jelly melted and became the surprise hidden in the meatball. Old Hunter's eyes lit up. He couldn't help but want to applaud Hades's ingenious idea. After the broth, he carefully chewed the meatball. The texture of the meatball also surprised him. One had to know that they had seen Meg pound the beef tens of thousands of times, turning it into a pile of minced beef, and then squeezing it into a meatball. Therefore, he didn't have high expectations for the meatball's texture from the beginning. However, reality gave him a slap in the face. The meatball's texture was simply amazing. It was delicious and chewy, and the texture was even better than fresh beef. Moreover, during the hammering process, the fascia and fat were removed, making the meat extremely delicate and smooth. The more one chewed, the more delicious it was. It was simply a kind of fascinating enjoyment. Rip! Two of Old Hunter's tight-fitting shirt's buttons burst open, and his back was directly torn open. "I understand now." Old Hunter's face was filled with joy. He looked at Meg and said, "Since the meat was hammered and not cut, the muscle fibers of the beef were not cut, so the texture of the beef was retained, right?" "Yes." Meg nodded. "A very genius idea." Old Hunter gave Meg a thumbs up and praised, "This is the dish that gave me the biggest surprise of the day. The combination of beef and prawn is unexpectedly perfect." Old Hunter's comment made the judges' expectations for the meatball even higher. One had to know that Old Hunter was the most ruthless of the judges. Regardless of the person, just the dish in front of him was enough to make him give such a high evaluation. It was obvious that the meatball brought him a great surprise. It tore the clothes of two judges. "This meatball is too awesome. The situation seems to be turning around. Don't tell me that Brother Justice is going to rely on this ordinary meatball to enter the finals. What are these judges talking about?" Can't they be more professional? Let me try it too. So infuriating. The audience's expectations were raised by a few more points. On the top floor of the Twin Towers building, a collie stared at the small bowl of meatballs on the screen. She slightly knit her brows as she said to herself, although I like my big brother Hades's looks, these meatballs don't look that tasty at all. Why did Nancy's clothes tear when she only ate one? Has she always been this sensitive? Then, without turning her head, she ordered the secretary beside her, go and get me a bowl. Young miss, this. The secretary was a bit embarrassed. He only roasted 12 lamb chops yesterday, so it's fine if you can't get it. But today he cooked a large pot of meatballs and there's still half a pot left. If you can't even get this, then you can scram. A collie said in a cold voice. I'll go now. The secretary quickly replied before quickly leaving. At the competition venue, Iman's forehead was already covered in sweat. After Nancy and Old Hunter tasted it, they both gave Hades's explosive white water meatball a high evaluation. It made him who thought that he had already entered the finals feel a bit of pressure. This kind of evaluation, in the Chef King competition, he had never heard it from these two people before. Now he could only pray that the judge's evaluation of the meatball was different, preventing him from receiving a terrifying high score like yesterday. Chapter 2462. The juicy whitewater beef meatball received high praise from Nancy and Old Hunter. It was a new force to be reckoned with. The other judges also began to taste the meatball. Exclamations and cries of surprise rose and fell one after another. The sound of clothes tearing could be heard. It was a rare scene in the history of the Chef King competition. The meatball's appearance was completely different from its ordinary appearance. The taste of the juicy white water caught the judges off guard. Julian looked around and felt a little gloomy. The judges didn't seem to be in Iman's favor. What kind of secret was hidden in the meatball? He scooped up a meatball and looked at it carefully. He still couldn't see anything special about it. Then, he put it into his mouth. Julian bit into the meatball. He felt like he had bitten an egg. The tender beef was cut open by his teeth, and the hot soup splashed in his mouth. Oh! Julian was shocked. He didn't expect the meatball to be filled with soup. He quickly realized that it was the whitewater shrimp jelly that Hades had wrapped in the meatball. He didn't expect it to have such a wonderful effect. The freshness of the shrimp jelly and the freshness of the beef jelly made the meatball taste better than he had expected. This dish was made with relatively cheap ingredients, but it was much more impactful than the previous 3 dishes made with expensive ingredients. As an old chef who had been cooking for hundreds of years and was one of the top few people in the industry, he had to admit that this explosive gravy whitewater beef meatball was really awesome. It was a dish that could be a signature dish in a restaurant. It only needed a little bit of effort on the plate. With Hades's age, if he didn't have a powerful master, he would be a genius among geniuses. Yesterday's charcoal grilled lamb chop and today's juicy whitewater beef meatball were all created by himself. Iman is in a bit of danger now. Julian's mood became heavier. Although he also wanted his favorite disciple to advance to the finals, Miss Nancy had shown great affection and recognition for Hades. It would inevitably affect the other judges' scores. Moreover, as a judge of the Chef King tournament for 3 years, he had a generous appearance fee and the fame that came with it, so he couldn't let his disciple win in the competition. Wrapping the beef meatballs with white shrimp paste is indeed very creative and pleasantly surprising. In terms of the choice of ingredients, they also brought out the best in each other. The most suitable is the best. This point is worth learning from all chefs. Julian put down his spoon and looked at the camera. However, there are many steps for a chef to complete a dish. In the end, the appearance of the dish will be presented to the diner first, which is the so-called plate presentation. In this regard, I think contestant Hades can continue to improve and make his dishes more visually appealing. Thank you. Meg smiled and nodded, but in his heart, he cursed the old fox. The other judges were full of praises, but Julian didn't find fault with the taste. Instead, he went along with the compliments and then found fault with the presentation. If it wasn't for the fact that he felt that it was troublesome to separate the dishes after admiring them, he could also carve 2 small flowers and place them on the table. He was sure that they would look good. I don't think there's a problem with the small bowl presentation. After all, not all restaurants are as grand as Tucker Hotel, where every dish has to be beautifully decorated, David said with a smile. In the streets and alleys of the west side of the city, there are many small restaurants, and the most common dish there is a small bowl. The dishes are small, but the taste is not bad. The presentation is not exquisite, but the taste is much better than many big restaurants. If you can eat a small bowl of steaming beef meatballs in the morning in winter, it would be wonderful. There's no need for the fancy presentation. I agree. A small bowl, sprinkle some chopped green onions, eat meatballs, and drink meat soup. It's not as tasty as the ones from the big bowl. Old Hunter followed. A professional gourmet like David knew more about food than he did. All the judges nodded their heads in agreement at his words. Nancy finished 4 beef meatballs in small bites and drank up the beef bone soup in the bowl. Only then did she realize that she was full. Today's meal had been arranged clearly by Hades. She thought that she had found a master of barbecue, but now it seemed that he was also a master of rolling meatballs. This master was right. Director, the number of people online has exceeded 2 billion. The assistant's voice sounded in the headset. Johnny's eyes lit up, and he opened his bracelet to take a look at the live broadcast room. Sure enough, the number of people in the main live broadcast room of the Chef King competition had just exceeded 2 billion, reaching a historical peak. And this was also the peak in the history of the Micropush live broadcast room. The Hades incident, together with the previous incident of Nancy's shoulder girdle collapse, brought a terrifying amount of traffic to the program team. This kid is really a blessing. Johnny's eyes were shining as he looked at Hades. Yesterday, he was still feeling sorry for Jasper's withdrawal from the competition. Looking at it now, it was a great thing. Otherwise, how could this Chef King competition, which was criticized as the most boring competition, be so popular? I have to let him enter the finals. Johnny rolled his eyes and quickly typed a line of words on his bracelet and sent it out. The judge's evaluation of Hades's explosive whitewater beef meatball was as exciting as a roller coaster. From the initial low expectations of its appearance to the shock of tasting it, it could be said that it was full of twists and turns, which also made the audience's mood fluctuate. However, Iman and Angelina both got very high scores and maintained a certain lead over Hades in the online competition. This also made it uncertain whether Hades could make a comeback and enter the finals again. Okay, the judges have finished tasting and gave a very high evaluation of Hades's explosive whitewater beef meatball. Will he be able to perform the miracle of a comeback like yesterday? Let's invite our live judges to start giving their scores. The host said loudly, and a 15-second countdown appeared behind the judges. The scene suddenly quieted down, and everyone quietly watched the big screen that was ticking down. Iman clenched his fists tightly, cold sweat sliding down his forehead and the tip of his nose to the ground. He never thought that Hades's ugly meatball would be such a big threat to him. If he's also eliminated, it doesn't feel so bad. Padas glanced at Iman, revealing a gloating smile. He was already sure that he would be eliminated anyway, but if he could see Iman, who was usually quite arrogant because his master was a judge, being eliminated, he would feel a little better. However, this guy who came out of nowhere was really strong. The judges were full of praise for him in 2 consecutive rounds. This was a scene that had never happened in the entire season. End of chapter. Chapter 2463. As the countdown ended, Hades' score was displayed on the big screen under the nervous attention of the audience and the audience in front of the screen. Judges' score, 96. Online PK score, 7. Total score, 93. 4. The scene was silent for a moment before it attracted a burst of exclamations. The judge's score of 96 was dazzling and dazzling. More importantly, his total score was higher than Iman's and he was ranked second, successfully advancing to the finals. 96 points. This judge's score is incredible. So strong. I thought 95 was the upper limit, but it's just the beginning. As expected of my brother Justice, he's unparalleled. The screen was filled with words of Brother Justice's awesomeness, so the audience's mood was clear. Iman's face turned pale and his body swayed, almost falling down. He thought that victory was in his hands, but he never thought that Hades would actually get a high score of 96 points, surpassing him by a small margin to become second place. 96 points, this was the highest score in this year's King of Cooks competition. Yesterday's score of 95 points was shocking enough, but who would have thought that this seemingly ordinary meatball could go one step further? Julian slightly knit his brows and it was hard to hide the surprise in his eyes. In order for Iman to advance, he only gave Hades 8 points, which meant that at least 7 judges gave Hades a full score. Of course, Hades was a new force to be reckoned with. He was the #1 dark horse in this year's King of Cooks competition. His performance in 2 consecutive competitions had suppressed the audience, so it was not hard to understand why the judges liked him. If it wasn't for the fact that he had only joined the program for a short time and his online PK score was relatively low, even Angelina would not be able to suppress his limelight. Nancy's lips curled slightly. He was indeed the man she liked, always bringing surprises to people. Based on Johnson's feedback, the results of this semi-finals were excellent and Meg deserved the most credit. Brother Hades is so great. On the top floor of the Twin Towers, a colleague jumped up from the sofa and looked at Hades on the screen with sparkling eyes. He's handsome, knows how to cook, and is so good at acting. This is simply the template of a main character. I definitely can't miss this kind of man. After coming to the dungeon, did he specially develop a new dish for this competition? She looked at Meg, who seemed to be emitting a dazzling light on the stage, as if she was looking at a monster. Although she wasn't a regular customer of Amy's, she was certain that the 2 dishes that appeared in these 2 matches weren't on the menu. And judging from the performance and scores of the 10 professional judges on the scene, this was definitely not a perfunctory work created at the last minute. What surprised she even more was that Meg, who was cooking on stage, was indeed enjoying the process. He was the most powerful being on the Norland continent, a super powerful being who was on the verge of becoming a transcendent, and he was serious about being a chef. Amazing. Angelina looked at Meg with a fangirl look in her eyes. It was another record for this year's Chef King tournament. Moreover, she guessed that Master Iman might have been involved in this as well. Otherwise, the score would have been even higher. Thank you. Meg smiled and nodded. He didn't seem too surprised by this result. Indeed, this did not meet his expectations. He had thought that he would be able to get full marks. After all, this was an improved version of the explosive pissing beef meatball. It would be too much not to give him full marks since he had swung the iron rod 26,000 times, right? However, this result was barely enough. At least he had advanced to the finals. By this time tomorrow, his online PK score should be around 9 points. When that time came, he would have a final showdown with Angelina, and it would be a contest of strength. Okay, with the final score of contestant Hades, the semi-finals have come to a successful end. Angelina and Hades are in first and second place with 94, 6 and 93, 4 points respectively. They have advanced to the finals. Iman and Potas have contributed an exciting competition and delicious food. Unfortunately, they have lost and will bid farewell to the stage of our Chef King tournament. The host officially announced the results of the competition. Although Iman was dissatisfied, he still kept his composure and congratulated Hades and Angelina. Although it was a pity that he had to stop in the semi-finals and had no chance to enter McCarthy Manor, he was still the apprentice of the head chef of Tucker Hotel and the future successor of the head chef. He also had a bright future. Congratulations, Hades. Hades, YYDS. Will there be a miracle of getting full marks in the finals tomorrow? I feel like Hades is a treasure trove. Did the program crew do it on purpose? Did they hide him for so long before letting him come on as a substitute? I think the director's brain must be fried. How could they hide such a hot topic at the end of the show? The bullet screen was full of congratulatory messages for Hades advancing to the finals. Johnson looked at the number of viewers that exceeded the peak of 2.1 billion and burst into tears. He also felt that his brain must have been damaged. He didn't manage to discover a superstar like Hades in the beginning and almost caused the most boring Chef King tournament ever. Then came the emotional farewell of the two eliminated contestants. As the semi-finalists, they had gained great popularity in the Chef King tournament. After bidding farewell to the competition, whether they returned to being chefs or debuted as celebrities, they would have a bright future ahead of them. Meg and Angelina, on the other hand, received a round of praise from the judges as they had advanced to the finals. After a round of pleasantries, the live broadcast that had caused a huge response in the underground city finally came to an end. Meg turned on his wristband as he walked off the stage. There was still a final tomorrow. After that, Nancy should arrange for him to go to McCarthy Manor. Before that, he still had something to do. Mr. Hades. A voice sounded behind him. Meg frowned slightly and turned to look at Angelina, who was standing behind him. I want to invite you to have lunch together. Is that okay? Angelina bit her lower lip and said with a slightly red face. Woo-ding, the wristband vibrated slightly. Meg glanced at it and saw that it was 2 messages. Mr. Hades, let's have afternoon tea together. Nancy. Brother Hades, have lunch with me today. My car is downstairs, you must come. Akali said. This. Meg's frown deepened. Angelina saw that Meg's expression was dignified and she was a little nervous. She lowered her eyes slightly and her face was so red that it looked like blood was about to drip out. I'm sorry, I don't want to have any strange scandals during the competition. Next time. Meg shook his head and refused. This excuse. Tears welled up in Angelina's eyes. She bowed to Meg and said, I'm sorry. She quickly left. End of chapter. Chapter 2464. Angelina was pure, charming, full of energy, and could cook well. She was worthy of being called the goddess of the cooking world. However, Meg still preferred girls like Nancy and Akali. Could beauty be used as food? Rich women could. Meg did not have the ability to give each of his sisters a warm home, so keeping a distance from the girls was his last bit of gentleness. No time, no time, Meg coldly replied to a collie. He did not doubt that the McCarthy family would investigate him. If they found out that he had an ambiguous relationship with a collie, he would most likely be rejected. After all, the Dixon family and the McCarthy family had never been on good terms. This time, they had suffered a big setback because of the Horace incident. Meg was also wary of a collie. Although she acted like a fanatical young woman, it did not mean that she was a brainless woman. On the contrary, she was the smartest of the younger generation of the major tycoons in the underground city. Otherwise, how could she own one of the landmarks of Tucker City, the Twin Towers, at such a young age? Then he replied to Nancy with a short message, "Okay." A certain degree of alienation was the secret to keeping a woman interested and curious about you. It was not a joke to lick until you had nothing in the end. For a proud daughter like Nancy, she had been pampered since she was young and had countless licking dogs around her. At this time, the faintly discernible sense of alienation was more attractive to her. After all, he was the one and only chef. "How was your performance?" Meg and she walked out of the studio with a chuckle. "It was amazing," she honestly said. She looked at Meg with a bit of scrutiny. She still could not figure out why Meg could be like a fish in water when it was his first time participating in a variety show. It could even be said that it was his first time coming into contact with the underground world. He could even stir up the entire underground world by himself. "How's the Horace incident going?" Meg asked telepathically. "You know, this kind of thing doesn't progress too fast." Meg nodded thoughtfully. Even though Horace's case had caused a storm on the internet, the final result was still a result of a game between various parties. It had little to do with justice. "Nancy asked me out for afternoon tea. After that, I plan to go out," Meg said. "You're going to kill Fergus?" She paused. "I have no intention of challenging the transcendence of your buried city." Meg shook his head calmly. "I just want to go shopping and buy some local specialties for my daughter and wife." She caught up with Meg and sternly said, "I have to remind you again. According to the agreement, you can't bring anything from the underground city back to the Norland continent." "Don't worry, I won't take your robots back. I'm just bringing them some beautiful handicrafts," Meg comforted. "He actually rejected me again." A collie sitting on the sofa saw Meg's short reply and her teeth ached with anger. In the underground city, there had never been a man who had rejected her again and again. He didn't even bother to write a reason. "Miss, the explosive whitewater beef meatballs you wanted." The secretary excitedly walked over with an incubator in her hand. "Let me try it and see if I can forgive him." A collie sat up. The secretary opened the incubator and the rich fragrance of beef wafted out. Although she had been watching the show on the sofa and hadn't stopped eating snacks, a collie couldn't help swallowing her saliva when she smelled this fragrance. There were 5 meatballs in the crystal bowl, which were round and smooth. A collie picked up a spoon and scooped up a meatball. She gently blew on it before putting it into her mouth. She bit down on it in one go. "Oh whoa." A collie couldn't help opening her mouth when she was scalded by the hot soup. The soup splattered all over the secretary's face. The secretary took 2 steps back in a daze and almost fell to the ground. A collie was also stunned. It was a good thing they were at home. If they were outside, she would have lost all her face. Then a sweet taste bloomed on the tip of her tongue. Her taste buds that had been frightened by the hot soup were suddenly comforted. The fresh shrimp was wrapped in the slightly sticky meat soup, bringing the sweetness of the sea. Adding in the fragrance of the beef, it instantly made people fall into it. She felt as if she was swimming in a blue ocean and running across a vast grassland. She was very happy. After the soup, there were the springy meatballs. Chewing them bit by bit, there was a wonderful taste that made it hard for her to imagine that this was beef that had been tempered thousands of times. As for the rich fragrance of the beef, it was completely released when she chewed. She had never eaten such a strange food before. It caught people off guard and made them fall into it. The secretary wiped the soup off her face and looked at a collie with a panicked expression. "Miss, I'll take it away now." Her heart was about to break. Who would have thought that the explosive whitewater beef meatballs that had conquered the judges of the Chef King competition would make the young miss vomit? She was definitely dead today. "Who told you to take it away?" A collie glared at the secretary before scooping up another meatball. "Go and change your clothes. I'll take it away after I finish eating." Ow. All right. The secretary left in a daze. It seemed like the young miss liked it quite a bit. Meatballs came one after another, eating more and more. When the final meatball went down her stomach, a collie picked up the crystal bowl and drank all the soup. She licked her lips in satisfaction and revealed a faint smile. To be honest, this explosive whitewater beef meatball had far surpassed her expectations. It was no wonder Nancy treated him differently. She couldn't taste the roasted lamb chops yesterday, but today's meatballs allowed her to feel Hades' strength. This kind of outstanding man, not only did he have looks and a sense of justice, he could also make good food. If he was taken into Nancy's harem, she would never be able to eat his food again. No. This kind of thing definitely can't happen. This kind of outstanding man, I have to tightly hold on to him in my hands. A collie gritted her teeth with a determined look on her face. Submit Hades' information and have them finish the background check as soon as possible. After the competition tomorrow, I want to bring him back to the manor. Inside the office, Nancy gave this order to the secretary beside her. All right. The secretary nodded in response before quickly leaving the office. Roasted lamb chops, explosive whitewater beef meatballs, I want to know what kind of pleasant surprises you can bring me. Nancy said to herself with a faint smile. Hades' performance today made her even more certain that she would let him enter the Max Manor. But there were many rules in large clans and they were even stricter when it came to chefs. Even if it was someone she recommended, they had to go through the family's investigation. This chapter ends. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.